Shami Haya Shahala Ya Man. As it is in heaven, may it be on earth.
Yeah.
Messiah returns. Come up here, there's love here. No drugs here, nah, no fuss here. None of that stuff here. Who you can trust, yeah. I know you had enough of that stuff, yeah. Come up here.
Revelation 4, and seen the deeper in the spirit, the more galore. You ever felt like dirt stuck on the boards of the orators of floor? So I see heaven, of course, so repentantly, no remorse. I mean, angels be the support, Ruach be the force. Mashiach, you know he the door. I'll be y'all Psalms 27. We in his courts, where he remains between the cherubim. Angels bringing reports, getting praises from the seraphim as he watches the poor. And for all who would care for them. Matthew 6 is the source. They call his name and then he dead for them. Blessed the poor in spirit, cause who knows what's prepared for them. Words cannot explain the pain, the righteous feeling this delirium. Jacob is a worm and we stuck in Babylonian terrariums. Wicked getting faced by y'all judgment, they not aware of him. And that right there's a curse that is worse than bombs from the aerial. Take cover in his presence inside his sectional and reverence him. Little tastes of mine, got the treasure though.
Come up here, there's love here. No drugs here, nah, no fuss here. None of that stuff here. Who you can trust, yeah. I know you had enough of that stuff, yeah. Come up here, come up here. There's love here. No drugs here, nah, no fuss here. None of that stuff here. Who you can trust, yeah. I know you had enough of that stuff, yeah. Come up here.
Faith like Miriam, to conceive and get prepared for them who waited for his righteousness till Yah delivered him out of the womb of Mizraim into Nazareth. It's a stem of Jesse with the root coming out of it, the prophetic realm. Isaiah 11:1, the Son of the Highest came into the world to give his people truth and the light and way. Though all can be saved to his people, the commandments he gave. Though they were dispersed, they were united as slaves in this cage. Guess what? Every wicked bird, I don't know if you heard. And if this time it's the first, prepare yourself, this sounds absurd. We are the Israelites, the so-called blacks, it's in this word. From Kumbaya, hallelujah, to Yah's the King of earth. Ezekiel 37, although we are deep in dirt, in the mud, the highest will raise up like Lazarus out the hearse. Tabernacle shirt, we coming together for sure. As in the days of Eden, may it be when Messiah returns.
Come up here, there's love here. No drugs here, nah, no fuss here. None of that stuff here. Who you can trust, yeah. I know you had enough of that stuff, yeah. Come up here, come up here. There's love here. No drugs here, nah, no fuss here. None of that stuff here. Who you can trust, yeah. I know you had enough of that stuff, yeah. Come up here, yeah. Come up here.
Yeah, I've been looking at the news, I've been waiting. I've been rolling through the most desolate places. Always tend to see brown royal faces. Eyes looking at the sky, I've been patient. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken. Soldier, you being sent in the midst of the heartless. Helmet check, belt check, you know you a target. Boots check, sword check, finish what he started. Shield check, Hasatan, shoot arrows out of the darkness. What's the mission? Open your hand, take these seeds. They need to reach the most desolate sheep. They need to eat, they grief will feed. Though due to fear, some have abandoned these. They have been praying and seeking, steadily pushing through their grief. Warrior, remember, but you was inside the darkest deep. Iniquity that petrified your mind just by the memories of den of thieves. The Messiah came down through the dirt for you and me. The least that we can do is assist him in waking up to sleep. The more you open the door to that sin, the more it starts pouring in. And when you want to climb out the rabbit hole, take swore, repent. Now while you only a child, cause once you let it win, it wins again. The flesh is weak, we walk inside the spirit. news, I've been waiting. I've been rolling through the most desolate places. Always tend to see brown royal faces. Eyes looking at the sky, I've been patient. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken. I know you've been influenced by what's in your environment. Pride is deadly, cast it aside, don't let it rise within. Sexualize or sodomize, that's done to a lot of children. Inside of our communities, though some gon' silence it. How you create an angry child? Is his father living? Get his father missing, that makes some violent children. His uncle is a pedophile, though that's his father figure. His mother running round and round, feel like he died within. Though everyone he know gotta live their life like this. Mama still ain't pay the bills, what type of life is this? It's either starve or pray that I be y'all don't mind my sins. I gotta bust open that safe and told that 9 to spin. Nah, you don't gotta ride like this. Elijah was hungry in the desert, what did Abba sin? What type of God you think we serve that would forget about his? A nurse and mother made, though Abiyah does not forget. I've been looking at the news, I've been waiting. I've been rolling through the most desolate places. Always tend to see brown royal faces. Eyes looking at the sky, I've been patient. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken. I've been patient, I've been patient. When we ask people, I'll start to awaken.
Mamleket Kohanim, Kingdom of Priests, Culture, and Heritage Preservation, to preserve, support, and promote the culture, history, and heritage of African every people scattered worldwide throughout the diaspora. Objective is to raise awareness and support to assist those who descend from the ancient African every groups, scattered throughout the globe with their desire to learn more about their history. The organization's efforts will be to connect with others of this heritage, scattered through the world through education, research, networking, media, and charitable efforts. Exodus chapter 19, verse 5 through 6, King James Version. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and there shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, Mamleket, Kohanim, and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 through 10. 9sb 95. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. For you once were not a people, but now you are the people of God. You had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Here are our customs. We turn towards Jerusalem when praying. 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 38 through 39 says, If they return to you with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, where they have been taken captive, and pray toward their land, which you have given to their fathers, in the city which you have chosen, and toward the house which I have built for your name. Then hear from heaven, from the dwelling place, their prayer and supplications, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. We blow the shofar, or trumpet every feast day and Shabbat. Numbers chapter 10, verse 2. Make yourself 2 trumpets of silver, of hammered work you shall make them, and you shall use them for summoning the congregation, and for having the camps set out. When both are blown, all the congregation shall gather themselves to you at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Here are some of the every Hebrew words we use. If you are interested in merchandise, please visit our website at https://mamlaketkohaneum.org. Please read if you are interested in becoming a monthly member, giving a donation, or becoming a volunteer. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Praise Yah. We thank Yah for bringing us together on this holy and blessed day. We hope you had a great week, and we praise Yah for allowing us to get to this day, no matter how our week was, to give Him praise. We thank Yah for this day of rest and restoration. You know, that's why I say salam, restoration, versus just salom, which means peace. So we thank Yah for this restoration as well and what He's doing in our hearts and for His people. And even if we had a struggle throughout the week, just this is a day of promise as well, that He's going to do a great thing for us, as His covenant has been from the very beginning of the world, that we give Him praise on this day, just like His covenant is to His people, that if we obey and do His will, that He's going to restore us as well. Hallelujah. And the scripture that I have today is Exodus 23, coming out, starting at verse 20. And it says, "Behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way, and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces. But you shall serve Yahuwah your El, and he will bless your bread, your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. There shall be no miscarrying or barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror ahead of you, and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn their backs to you. I will send hornets ahead of you, so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, the Hittites before you. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, that the land may not become desolate, and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you, little by little, until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. I will fix your boundaries from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river Euphrates, for I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They shall not live in your land, because they will make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you." Hallelujah. All right, let me blow the shofar and we can have prayer. Hallelujah. Struggle there a little bit. All right, let's turn towards Jerusalem. Dear Yah, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you're doing and all that you're going to do for our people. We thank you for what you're doing for us as individuals as well. And we don't count this day just another day. We count it as a day that we are able to come before you, to be renewed, to be refreshed, to be strengthened, to know that your word is true. So help us to grab you by your hand, to have faith in you and trust you with our heart, so we can walk step and step along the way that you have prepared for your people. Prepare for us from the beginning of the world. Even before we created, you had us in mind. You had a thought about us to place us upon this earth with your spirit. So we ask you to help us to walk the course and understand your ways, to understand the destiny that you have set before us as your people, and open our hearts to do what's right, to cleave to you in this time, to know that you are our Father and that you are the creator of heaven and earth, that no weapon formed against us shall prosper. So we ask you to touch whoever that is seeking you at this time, even if they're in a moment of despair, questioning, their relationship with you. I just feel that somebody's there and ask you to bless them, to strengthen them, to guide them, and to know that you're listening. Give them that confirmation and knowing that you are listening to their needs and that you desire for them to walk closer to you, to be a testimony for others when they are able to accomplish whatever you have for them to do. And we ask you to bless the rest of this service. Help us to be pleasing unto your sight. Help us to give you our all and to do what you've called us to do by listening to your word and getting instruction for us to move forward as a people. We love you. We praise you. In Yahushua HaMashiach's name we do pray. Hallelujah. Amen. Amen. We'll have a song by Maisha.
Come by, Maya, come by, come by, Maya, come by, come by, Maya, come by, oh yeah, come by, somebody's praying, yeah, come by, somebody's praying, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody's praying, yeah, come by, yeah. Oh, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody needs you, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody needs you, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody near you, yeah, come by, yeah. Oh, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody's crying, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody's crying, yeah, come by, yeah. Somebody's crying, yeah, come by, yeah. Oh, yeah, come by, yeah. Oh, yeah, come by, yeah. Oh, yeah, come by, yeah.
Hallelujah. Praise Yah. Come by here. Yeah, definitely need him to come. A lot of stuff is actually happening around us in this world. And I've been telling people for a long time, but it's amazing that a lot of the things are starting to happening. So we definitely need to, have our listening ears on the things that's going on in the world, and also have our listening ears on the things that Yah is trying to speak to us. As African Americans, as Africans, as Israelites throughout the four corners, no matter if you're here in America or one of the islands or in Europe or wherever else. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But when we're starting to wake up to our history, we are now becoming a threat, right? So it's very important now that you really listen. There's a lot of people who's talking about who we are as Israel and starting to come out more. And as I tell people, look at the history first. If you're in doubt, that's why I tell people, look at your family lineage, look at your DNA, look up all that stuff first to make sure you're confident in who we are. Because, I can show people for the last, how many years we've been doing this, 3-4 years. And somebody will see one article and they'll go based upon that one article because, some white man, so sad to say, will say it, right, with confidence, with no proof, no citations or anything. And if we come with multiple citations and proof and history and all that, right, people still are in doubt. So we want to make sure that people are confident in what they say, and it's not being against people who are of European background, because sometimes they say stuff that actually is in our benefit. But I'm just talking about in the modern day world, a lot of times, we can have historians, doctors, all kind of people to tell people who they are, and they will ignore that. And just Stockholm syndrome, those who enslaved us, they will give a higher credibility to them, even though sometimes it's to our destruction, as we have found in the lost history that we have also. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. But with some announcements that we have, so we'll have our community Shabbat next week. And so please make sure, if you haven't signed up, go to Eventbrite, just so we'll have some food, enough food to spread around, especially if you're coming from far away. We want to make sure that we have to food to make sure we accommodate you. Try to make sure people don't cook and buy stuff on the Shabbat. So we try to prepare for our people, and we thank y'all for the donations and things that people have given unto us to have the thoughtfulness of helping others. A lot of our donations are coming from people who are not even involved. So it just shows you the love that our people have for one another. So thank you all who've been contributing, and even some of the faithful from the very beginning, even before we started Mamleket Kohanim. Saw a donor who gave something who, she's not actually involved as much as our weekly stuff, but she's always been there, and just believed in the things that Yah was trying to do through me, and for his people. So praise Yah for them as well. All right, so next, we also have our family fellowship. So please make sure you sign up for that, because sometimes they ask for reservations and a certain number. So don't wait till last minute. That's one of the things that I'm trying to make sure we push, because it takes a lot of organization. And sometimes when people wait till the last minute, it really throws a lot of stuff off. So please make sure we have a committed heart to the things of Yah. And if you're going to come, if you're able to come, make sure you just go ahead and take the time to sign up. Sometimes that's all it takes, because a lot of our events are free anyway, or small, very small amounts. So please make sure you sign up so we can work together and be able to fellowship together. All right, so next. And one thing, the Shabbat service, we're going to cancel that just because we didn't have enough, had about 8 people. So, for us to actually get a whole community center and try to prepare for food for that many people, is, want to make sure we do stuff right. So we don't have a facility. If we had a facility, it'd be a little different, if we had a place, but right now we don't have that. So we'll try to fellowship with another congregation somewhere in the state. All right. But this is a new video that we just put out, the Black Church's Israelite Roots, coming out. So there's a lot of history around the Black Church. I did a thing about Israel and the Black Church, a lesson one time. So I think it was multiple days, if I remember correctly. There's a lot of evidence. This just didn't come out of nowhere. A lot of times you'll see a lot of the Christian apologists or people that's trying to suppress this information. They'll come the same, like, this prophet, William Crowdy. I might got his name wrong. But he's Church of God and Saints in Christ, the COGASIC. They actually are based on Prophet Crowdy. And because he had a vision and said that we were the Israelites, and, he touched a lot of people around the world, right? But before him, there's a lot of stuff even before him. So it just didn't come out of nowhere, which would make it seem like the person just had a vision. But yet in the Bible, there's a lot of people who had a vision, and they, went forth with the vision that was given unto them. So we can't just knock that as well. But we will see that if you just search the history, right, all the history we talked about, Spain and Portugal and West Africa, people migrating from Israel to North Africa to Egypt, and then they come down to West Africa, and all that history, bloodline, and all, we just can't look at Christian sources of modern day, but, even Muslim sources, right, talks about certain people that came to the land and, what they did. So we got to make sure we understand from different perspectives so we won't be lied to again, right? It's important that we just don't take on what everybody say. We need to, do due diligence. So even what I say, take your time. And, I get a lot of feedback online from the comment sections, which I'm thankful for. Sometimes people teach me stuff that I didn't even know. So, but it's important that you cite your sources, right? Even we got to be careful from our own communities just saying stuff and not actually citing their sources, so we will, be able to grow together. Everybody has a form and opinion, and we can make Superman to be real if we really wanted to, but we know that that's not true. So we want to make sure we cite our sources so we can share and actually grow together. All right. So this is what that's about. It's about, a lot of things. Then at the end, I talk about, even as part of the lessons that we're talking about today, it's important that you looked at that one, because I'm not going to teach that one again, even though it's talking about our timeline and some of the connections of why our covenant is important. So, we always try to always have the teaching, right? The heritage moment, and then something that connects back to the Bible. So the biblical part of this, when we first put it out, I think it's maybe a year ago we did this one. It also talks about why the covenant that was given, and how we know that, even though the covenant is there, and Israel did stuff that was wrong to break the covenant, that Yah still has the covenant still in place, going based upon the Brit Hadashah and what Paul says, right? The people, you just say Paul means there was a new Israel, right? But it's not. Paul even said that the covenant still stands for the Israelites people during his day. All right, so that's that teaching. Please go out and support, share it, and for us to be able to grow together. And I haven't seen it, but what's the Reverend Fred Price Jr. heard there was an interview, and he was talking about some of the same stuff from a historical standpoint, but he did try to, from my understanding, haven't seen it yet, but then try to change, saying that a lot of the feast days and stuff is no longer important, from what I heard. I got to go check it out myself. I only seen the bits and pieces of it, but in the same sense, then, I just feel like then people have to actually say, if the feast days are not important, why are the pagan holidays still being done, right? You got to get the same justification. So we want to make sure that we understand, history part first before we just jump over to the theology, because anybody has, they can spin. We've been spinning stuff in different denominations, and even within the Israelite communities, you can see as part of this, all the different people that say we're Israel, but they all have different religious beliefs in the background. So stay focused on the history for now, at least if you, follow along with us, if you're still not clear, because we're going to, take you. That's why we do both sides, because you got to do the religious, the more scriptural, I wouldn't call religious. We always talk about the difference between religion and righteousness, right? Relationship. We want to have a relationship with Yah. All right, so next. So this is one before that. Thank y'all for sharing, or, I don't know. Like I said, these are old teachings, so I don't know what happened with this video, but just like 17,000 people have viewed it. So praise Yah for those who have shared, and those who have viewed it. So all this is stepping stones for us. It's not just about getting views. We thank Yah for a lot of the YouTubers that's out there that's sharing a lot of this history. And we're just trying to share it to give you, because like I tell you, go to their pages, right? After you look at it, go to their pages to see the whole thing, because we only can show you a small section of it in this limited time that we have. So we want to make sure we highlight our people, and especially, I know some of them sell books and stuff. We want to make sure we highlight that. So if they have something, please share it with us, because we want to make sure that people, are able to get those resources. This is basically what we're trying to do, is trying to get the information out. And that way people can share it with other, now it brings a different spin on some of the stories that we have been given. And now we can basically share more within our community, because they haven't shared this. Once again, like I said, why haven't they shared this information over all these years? And why should we continue to trust people who haven't been hiding stuff at Yale and Duke and, all these different schools that have very prestigious, but this stuff is not in HBCUs. It's not in some of the, libraries that's right in our local, schools don't teach about this, trying to get rid of Black history, at least here in a certain way here in North Carolina. So, why is all this happening, right? So we want to make sure that we share the information, and then do a deep dive to share it and research it, so you can come back and share more, right? We want to share. We want to be the people that share with one another, and not just be like the dictator of information to use it for our advantage, which even in our community happens sometimes as well, sad to say. So next. And then the last one that we're going to show, the last three ones I tried to show, but, once again, 1619, what happened as part of slavery coming to America. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, but, about the story of Spain, the Negroes that came from Spain. Negro is a Spanish word for Black, right? The black people, the Negroes that came from Spain and Portugal, right? So why are we called Negroes in America? And you know, at the beginning of our history here, not just called black. It shows you that we have a connection with Spain and Portugal. There's something that happened that they made a connection to people in West Africa with Negroes and people over here with Negroes, because there's a lot of people that came that went down to sub-Saharan Africa from Spain and Portugal, and some of the tribes that are there to this day still know, some of them still know their connection back as well. But some of them were colonized, right? You're running around trying to colonize and enslave people. They're going to be running from one place to another, and they're going to, you know, lose some of their history and memory and stuff as well. But then there are some that migrated straight to Africa from Israel, and they know their stories as well. So it's important to understand, because there's 12 tribes, right? It wasn't just 2. A lot of the ones that's taken to Spain and Portugal were from Judah. So we need to understand that history, because Yah is now trying to call us back, not just being Israel, but even being the tribes, right? Like how are we going to know what tribe we come from when Yah put everything back? He has a plan for that, right? We trust in his plan, and maybe it's not going to be revealed right now, but the more that we seek him, the more that he reveals to us also. All right. So next. All right, so yes, and please go to the group and add, you know, especially if you're locally or want to come involved locally, even if you're at a distance and want to do some of the feast days and celebrations and, you know, some of the, know what's happening locally, please, you know, sign up there. You have to know somebody though, so that's an important piece. All right, so next. All right, the Hebrew heritage fact. So we know we say Kase, it is Hebrew, which means Hebrew. That's the Hebrew word for Hebrew. So next. All right, this is our disclaimer here. It's important to understand that, once again, this is videos I'm sharing. I always, even myself, don't agree with all of the theology and things, but some of the things that is actually being shared is important to criticize or to, you know, this news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research as well. All right, and just want to say Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Mom, see you in there. Shabbat Shalom. Miss Rosemary. Ak Afro Spear. Oh, Andre's out there. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Akude Patinya. Ak Devon. Good to see y'all. Oh, Cousin Hazel. Good to see you. Glad you are recovering, and continue to pray for you. Shabbat Shalom. Miss Vicky. And Shabbat Shalom, my son, Jay Shia for real. So Nathan too. Oh, Shabbat Shalom, Nathan. Always been. Thank you for coming and being supportive. Thank you for always. It really blesses me to see that you're in the midst. So praise Yah and everyone else as well. All right. So this is the Gates of Huldah. She is very good with research. She goes and gets stuff that you don't hear at a lot of other sites. So she's very scholarly, and you know, she definitely is an Israelite. She brings it hard sometimes. So she knows her history, and she knows who we are and who she is as the Israelites as well. So another site that we share sometimes. But here it's important to also understand the gaps, right? So we know that we come from different places throughout Africa, Spain, and Portugal, but especially, you know, what happened that changed us, where we lost our history, right? I think I said it last time too, where we talked about Spain and Portugal. How did, you know, during the Inquisition, the Israelites, or as people say, the Jews, Yahudims, as we say, Yahudims. So, you know, how did we go from being successful people to being slaves, right? And then you got to ask too, if they were enslaving Israelites or Jews in that area of Europe, how did they go from being enslaved to being some of the enslavers here in America, right? Something doesn't add up, right? I always see that, and I'm like, how did the people that were being persecuted end up having, you know, ships and coming here to America and different places of the islands and be the enslavers? It just doesn't make sense, right? So she's going to come out with some of this and say what switched around in Europe, and it's very interesting. You know, it's a lot of reading, which I think is actually better, right? Because she's giving you the sources that you can cite and go look it up yourself, which I say is important. a lot of people get caught up in some of the entertainment factor, which is good. It keeps your interest. But anybody can put anything when you just put a video in. Sometimes people send stuff to us, and it sounds good, but when you actually go back and cite what they said and some of the scriptures that's being repeated, it's not right. They make up stuff to make sure it pushed towards their interest. So we got to be careful, and she's going to cite sources. So if you got a pen and some paper or a phone or something, screenshots, make sure you do it, because some of these resources are very hard to find. All right. So we'll play some. I'll cut in with some commentary, and then we're going to skip some because it's like, how long is it? 2 hours. So I cannot show 2 hours, right? That'll be the whole service. So we might actually start some this week and pick up some next week, but still don't want to compromise you from going to her site and listening to yourself, because I want to promote other sites and not just ourselves. So we'll play a little bit here, starting at the 5-minute mark, where she, it's important to understand what some of the things that was going on. And then we'll jump to the 59-minute mark and play a little bit of that, because that leads us into some of the discussion and some of the slides after this. All right. So we'll start from here. Thank you.
So I really want to dig into that discussion tonight and talk about the Sephardim, because we need to know who these people are. Who are they? Where did they go? The old historical texts describe them as being of a dark, melanated hue. So, yeah, similar to what you see on the screen. I would say they look like Negroes, don't you think? But some would say, no. But if they looked like that, you see BB on the left, we have to ask, Harpo, who this man? If they were portrayed as dark, melanated folk, who this? Look who's coming to dinner. So this article from the Times of Israel says, although his family hailed from Eastern Europe before immigrating to Israel decades ago, he says he is in fact part Sephardic, in that he traces his family back to Jews from Spain. So you all, I will be using that used word tonight, just for clarity, and that's how it's used in most of the texts. But of course, you all know that our ancestors were not called that. So again, I'll be referring to it. But we need to talk about this. And I have some more to share about him as it pertains to what's happening now, but I'll get into that near the end. So let's look at this, because when the Israelites were expelled, as I mentioned, this was seen as a critical turning point in Iberia's and the Sephardim's history. So we need to talk about this to get an understanding of what was going on during that time. And I know some of our other brothers and sisters have covered this, but I'm looking at it in the context of the slave trade, like what was going on, so that we can kind of trace some of these things as it was happening in these other nations. So many sources say the Israelites living in Portugal look like the Becaris people. And you see these people on the right. What do they look like? Because it's hard to believe that they all changed their skin color in such a short period of time. So I want to look at this source, and it's called A Treatise on Physical Geography, comprising hydrology, geology, meteorology, botany, etc. But the link is here for those of you wanting to pull this source up on your own and read some of this information. There's some interesting things in there that I found that I thought was interesting, but I want to share just some of this with you. So listen, it says, We are well aware that it has been repeatedly stated the American Indians are all of one hue. Such assertions could have proceeded only from theorists who had either a very limited or no acquaintance with them. The Arab tribes also exhibit a great variety of hues from the black of the Moghriba of the Sahara and the dark brown of the Shigya or the native of Oman to the comparatively fair hue of the Arab of Lebanon. The answer to such facts is intermixture. But listen, but the other features often show that there has been no intermixture. Thus, the Moghreba Arab shows by his features, hair, and general expression that he is not blackened by being partly of Negro descent. And we talked about that earlier, what the originals look like, not those folks who are in there today. It says, there is another fact which proves that the answer of intermixture is unsatisfactory. Where change of complexion is produced, as it often is by intermixture, there is only one or there is only an approximation to either of the colors. Thus, the mulatto is never as black as the Negro. So he's basically saying, okay, there's been some mixing here, but you can still tell that there's some resemblance, that someone has some of the dark color, even if they're mulatto, they're not as black as the Negro, but you can tell that they've been mixed. Now listen, it says, now in the cases we have mentioned, there is a complete.
So I think it's important to first understand, you saw the picture of what they were talking about. She was talking about how they made a comparison to the Jews, as we call them today, with the tribe that they were actually showing there in Africa, right? So that's amazing as well. So then it was also important to see her talking about mulattoes, right? Like, we, at least here in America, we don't see ourselves as being like a mulatto, but it was interesting that some of our friends from Africa, they thought we were half white, like 50% white. I'm talking about me and my wife, 50% white and 50% African. And I was like, no, we more than 50%. Now, some of us are, right? A lot of people in the civil rights time, especially, they were 50-50, right? Because, what happened through the slave trade. And then actually became, a lot of our older elders in our families. In some places, they might be, very light skinned, right? About what happened during the times of slavery and intermixing and a lot of stuff that actually happened. But some of those who actually fought during the time of civil rights, they were like big time, right? Like they were, full up saying about black and stuff, right? And talking about who they were as a people, how we were as a people. So we, when we talk about, like, I'm like 85% sub-Saharan, this is what sub-Saharan, 85%, but we still consider the intermix, and some people in other countries consider us more mulatto, right? Even my grandfather, who was very, he wasn't like black, but he was dark skinned black man. He was considered mulatto because of some of the mixture of our family with Native Americans and some of the, European people as well. But he was considered mulatto. So, and sometimes mulatto just doesn't mean that you intermix with a white and a black person. It could also mean a European and an African person. Even though the European could be a black European, they'll still consider you mulatto in some cases too, or a Native American and a black person, depending on what was the laws of those different places, which genealogists, people do genealogy, taught me to some degree. I'm not a professional or anything, but they said on some of the census, a mulatto might show up different ways, or a Native American might show up different ways. So colored, you'll see mulatto in some places, some states, and some places. So you really got to understand the differences between that. So just want to share that. But then also I see something, Judah was scattered to the four corners in captivity as indicated. Yes, Judah was definitely scattered to the four corners. Yes, Judah was definitely sent throughout, but yeah, in this way, the so-called Seraphidim were from the kingdom of Judah, among the first to be taken from Spain and Portugal to Jamaica and other islands. Still, Judah, the Rastafarians knew that we are the line of Judah. Yes, there are actually some of the first people that are taken even to the Dominican Republic. Also, they have the site, the first blacks, to talk about, at least the 1619 part, but there was actually people that came, but she would talk about too. So thank you for sharing that. And Shabbat Shalom, Cousin Shonda. All right, thank you.
Similarity of hue. The argument from intermixture is further rebutted by historic knowledge. Thus, the Jews are a people who have ever, according to the prophecy, dwelt alone, without intermixing with the nations to this day. So listen. Now, this separate race all descended from brown ancestors. Do I need to read it again for the people in the back of the room? This separate race all descended from brown ancestors. Brown, you all. He said they had descended from brown ancestry. And this is where those whose elevators don't go all the way to the top will jump in and say, but that's not talking about black, because black doesn't really mean black. So for the rest who can clearly see, it is very evident that those they label as black people or Negroes don't have black skin. Our skin tones are different shades of brown. Do you agree with that? Different shades of brown. So let's go on, because he's going to make himself very clear. So he says, I'm going to read this part again. This separate race all descended from brown ancestors, for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob must have been as dark as Mar Yohanan. Listen, if not darker. So they didn't look like Bibi. So he's saying they exhibit every shade of color from the black Jews of Malabar, of whom we have such an interesting account by Dr. Claudius Buchanan, to the rose and lily complexion of the Jewesses on the banks of the Albion. We're going to talk about that. He said, we need go no further than the Jews of southern Spain and compare them with those of Holland and northern Germany to perceive a very striking difference. The Spanish Jew is always dark complexioned, and his hair is uniformly black, whilst the German Jew is often as fair as any German and has light or red hair with blue eyes. So something happened. The various shades of color observable among the Negro or African race tends to the same conclusion. Along the coast of Guinea, which is low, marshy, and hot, we find jet black complexions. And this is the very country from which American Negroes have derived. So for those people who are still trying to argue the point, let this be proof number 1001 as to what the people look like. Okay.
So they got so many books now that they're, trying to change, what's going on. They know that this information is out here from a historical standpoint. And it's kind of hard to erase history, right? That's why I say stay focused on history. But a lot of times they're trying to redefine what dark means, right? That dark is swarthy, or, it's not what we call dark today. It's not African appearance dark, right? And that's just so crazy to me, as you even heard her talk about, because the oldest Africans are the Kosan people. So if you look at them, I think I talked about them before. They're like light brown, right? Like we'll say light skin in America, people that's in Africa, and they're the oldest people, maybe even in the world. And so they try to put an image of what black is, right? They try to redefine it wherever they want to during certain times and eras. But there's even some of the text that says that the Jews of Spain and Portugal were darker than Africans. So, that's why it's important for us to understand that the Portuguese Jews were darker than even Africans, right? So a lot of that colorism we got to just wash out even our own community also. What is black? Is black a crayon, right? We got people so beautiful from dark skin to light skin, even the people who don't have the pigment in the skin, what's it get called? Albinos. In Africa, they're considered to be black people, even though they have no pigment in their skin. So what is black, right? So we have to be careful for people not to redefine a lot of stuff for us as well. And we have to we understand some of the history too, right? So even like, Shabbat Shalom, to Patricia Hines, but, she's talking about even like the Rastafarians, right? A lot of them thought that, what's his name? Haile Selassie was the Messiah, right? So that was a whole different thing too that came in, but they knew that at least it was black, right? So, Haile Selassie himself said he wasn't, like the Messiah, but that was a big movement, but they had some kind of knowledge of that. So that's when they start going towards that. So this like memory, even some of the George Lilly, he was the first missionary of America, period, a black slave that came from Virginia and went down to South Carolina. And he's the one that started that congregation that started the First African Baptist Church, that they have the Hebrew cursive writing on the side. That's, in the video just put out, re-put out yesterday. And then he actually was a missionary. After he ran out, he got, kicked out. Well, he ran out with the British and went to Jamaica. He taught there too. So a lot of people don't know that history, right? Some of the early history of some of the people who actually, during that time, how they went to the islands as well and taught about who we were as a people too. So there's just so much history out there. So we can't, once again, this is a lady, she's a black lady. She's been teaching this longer than me, all these other people. And no matter how many resources out, like she said, 1,001 times of saying, showing you stuff, and people still don't believe, right? Of different articles and stuff. She's, of course, exaggerating 1,001, but there's a lot of resources out there. And now you have to kind of change your mind, right, of what's been taught to us, because they have books now that saying, I think it's called Hybrid Hate by Tudor Prophet. And he talks about the hate between the black, the similar of what was how black people were hated to Jews, and he makes a connection. And in some of his material, he'll say that dark is swarthy, is not really like black. So you got to understand what all that stuff means too, right? All right.
Okay. However, notice that he said those Jews from Europe who were living in Europe tended to be looking like Bibi. Some had red hair with blue eyes. So something happened where these lighter colors came in, and the prevailing thought is that they just seem to change colors like a chameleon and take on the phenotype of the host nations that they migrated to. Utter foolishness. Utter foolishness. But let's go on. So you see here, these images clearly show dark melanated people. The Bakaris, he's comparing those Israelites that left Spain and Portugal to these people. This is what they look like. And you can clearly see the woolly hair, Just look at this. And now if we just insert some common sense in there and think about the climate during that time. what would those people need to look like to endure the hot sun? Just some food for thought for those who are still trying to argue the point. So let's dig into this a bit more. I want to share excerpts from this book, Port Jews. Port Jews, Jewish communities in cosmopolitan maritime trading centers. This is from 1550 to 950. Now, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to pull up a copy of this one. You might, because there is an ebook copy of it. So this is by David Cesarini. Let's look at some things that he says here. All right. Listen to this. In the mid-17th century, the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam, because remember we were talking about the Netherlands, instituted several communal ordinances which reflected and constructed the desired ethnic transformation of the Jews into whites. Mic drop right there. Mic drop. Did you hear what he just said? In the mid-17th century, the Portuguese Jewish community of Amsterdam instituted several communal ordinances, laws, canons, which reflected and constructed the desired ethnic transformation of the Jews into whites. So what color were they before? What color was Miriam before she was struck with leprosy and she turned as white as snow? What color? Now, if you have no other source in your arsenal, this is one you need to have. Even if you need to screenshot that part, what color were they before? So for the people who keep commenting on the channel saying color doesn't matter, it has nothing to do with skin color, why don't you hop on over to the communities that whitewashed everything and tell them that? If it didn't matter, why did they change it? Why was there a need to make the world believe that the ancient Israelites looked like Bibi? Until you can answer that question, I have no need to respond to you. No need. So listen. So it says, whiteness became an operative principle in the organization of Jewish communal life in Amsterdam. Perhaps the first exclusionary practice emerged in 1627 when an ordinance was passed restricting access to burial at the community cemetery, officially opened only in 1618. Now that's an interesting date. A year before 1619. So the ordinance read in part, no Black person nor mulatto will be able to be buried in the cemetery except for those who had buried in it a Jewish mother. Pay attention to that. Jewish mother. No Black person or mixed person, mulatto, could be buried in the cemetery now that was supposed to be for ish people. But you couldn't be buried there based on this ordinance unless you had a Jewish mother buried there.
So stuff like that just shows you that there was something going on. If you have a cemetery where they're saying that Black people can no longer be buried and it's a Jewish cemetery, right? We know we're saying ish, but we know that that was a cemetery there. So what is going on, right? And it's interesting, even going earlier where she talks about the Maghreb, North Africa, that we have during some DNA tests. I don't think Mickey minds, but his DNA actually has some connection to that area. in North Africa, here in North Carolina, right? Nobody talks about North African stuff. We should talk about West Africa, Central Africa. But we have DNA that, as we talked about the how the Balfour people came over and they end up going down, like the Soninke people, and going, more to West Africa, or even like the Black Portuguese that actually went through. You can't fly from Israel to Spain, so they had to take people there, right, to travel in different directions to actually get there through ships and everything else, to caravans and everything else. So we know that a lot of them will have that, or even some of them got pushed down to North Africa right before the slave trade also. So all this is important to understand and start putting together those pieces, right? So don't just look at this video as like just this information. Think about all the stuff that we've been talking about, especially if you did your DNA. And now you can make some of those connections here of what might actually had to occur. And it looks like Akute, Patricia, you're already there. You're going exactly where I'm going. So she's talking about how the third generation have been going from Deuteronomy 23. So that's where we're going to be going to, even to Deuteronomy as well from this, because it's all connected. All the history from the past into now, it should be all connected, right? What Moses told our people, from what's going to happen during the time that they actually went to Israel to the time they got kicked out, all the way until, to now, right? That Moses was a prophet, right? So people forget about that. He was actually, a lot of his prophecies spoke about all throughout the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. So it's important to understand that also. All right, so we'll continue the video.
It says, none shall persuade any of the said blacks and mulattoes, man or woman, or any other person who is not of the nation of Israel, to make Jews. So it says, while the prohibition intended all foreigners, or it was intended for all foreigners, the specification of blacks and mulattoes reflected both the reality of their presence as slaves or servants in the Amsterdam Jewish community, as well as the degree to which they were seen to draw negative attention. So I hope you're getting that. An ordinance passed in 1614 with the initial purchase of this Ouderkerk cemetery had already established a separate section intended especially for the burial of slaves, servants, and Jewish girls who are not of our nation, though the motivation in 1627 still was halakhic. The language had in 12 years become explicitly racial. Now I'm reading through this because I'm going to connect some of these dots for you in a few minutes. But you need to pay attention. It's going to become clearer to you as I go on. It was hard being of a dark.
All right, so when she says halakha, that's that keyword, right? So I want to make sure y'all keep that in your back of your mind whenever you're doing research, because halakha is based upon the modern Jew and what they say is required now for conversion. So if you looked at the video yesterday we put out, right, you even heard Kafer's full name, Michelle Obama's first cousin, bless you, first cousin, who basically talked about how even though he says that the some of the Israelites, so I think he said Jews in West Africa, he basically, he said that they were connected to Israelites, but then he said that there's a conversion that still needs to happen, even though, so we're not for that. But bless you. So you can see what happened now, right? Like now in Israel, when the Israelites of the Hebrew Israelites of Dimona, of Israel, Dimona is a city in Israel where they moved from Chicago, they went to Liberia, and then they moved to Israel, right? And that was at the very beginning, around, when Israel still being formed in 1948 all the way into the 60s, and they were able to get in before certain requirements was placed on the people. So that's the reason why they were given the city of Dimona, and they didn't have to convert through Halakha Judaism, right? Through that process, I'm saying. So now, that becomes an issue of their identity there, their status and citizenship. Some of them go for the IDF and all that. But, now even here, you'll hear certain groups of even black Jews talk about halakha and stuff, right? That you have to go through that conversion process and be recircumcised even if you're already circumcised, to be recircumcised. And what does that mean, right? It's not as what you think. But, there's a lot of that going on now, too, that people are saying we need, even though we're Israelites, you still need to convert to Judaism. And we're not, at least from Memleket Kohanim, we feel like we're the original Israelites, right? 12 tribes. So why would we have to convert to something else? All right. Just want to make sure you pick that up also. All right.
In that day, think about what was going on in 1619. Of course, we know that has not changed. So we see segregation happening there. By this time, Israelites were being trafficked big time. So the official date on record of them being brought here was 1619. So all of this was taking place in these European nations. And of course, they didn't want anybody to think they owned slaves. They were trafficking them. But these places had slaves. So the question we should be asking, if this is a cemetery for Israelites and the sources tell us they were dark melanated people, why would they tell them they couldn't be buried there? We'll get to that. We will get to that. So listen to this. 4 years later, the men of the communal board decreed that circumcised Negro Jews were not to be called to the Torah or given any honorary commandment to perform in the synagogue. Now, we need to just stop right there. If this is a council representing Israelites, why would circumcised Negro Jews not be given any honorary commandments to perform in the synagogue? Why? So listen. For such is fitting for the reputation of the congregation and its good government. Dutch Protestant planters in Brazil had been making it difficult for their slaves to attend churches as early as, if not earlier, than a 1636 report to that effect by a Dutch Protestant pastor. So who are these people? So in 1647, a separate section of the Sephardic cemetery was established for all the Jewish Negroes and mulattoes. So again, we see segregation happening here. Let's go on though. Exceptions were limited to those who were born in Judaism, their parents. Now let's unpack this. Those who were born in Judaism, as in their parents were Israelites, but wouldn't that make them Israelites as well? Not if they or the parents converted to Catholicism and Christianity. They were basically saying after you convert to Christianity, your heritage is annulled. You are no longer an Israelite. I hope you get that. But there's more.
So hopefully you've been keeping track and been involved in some of the past videos we've been putting out or leading up to this, where the Black Portuguese Jews and some of the ones that was in Spain and so forth, I think was Truth Unedited as well as Benea, both Israel talked about how they were forced to convert to being new Christians, right? They were forced to convert, or they converted because to stop persecution. And they hid crypto Jews and hid some of their history there, right? So that's what what's going on, right? They're forcing them to convert to the Catholics are, but at the same time, the Jewish communities are saying if you convert, and now that you converted, and you know, especially being black, black Portuguese, and some of the original ones that was there, that you had to now you can't get your status back in these other communities because you converted. So there is now where they're basically determining where certain ones, I can't remember the term, but there's a certain modern day, they're saying that, oh, now some of the people in Spain, in the islands and Portuguese and stuff like that, you know, Spanish people that's more Hispanic, that, oh, yeah, you might still be Jews because you lost it because of the captivity that has happened and how you had to hide your identity, and some of the Jesuits were looking for people and all that, right? But they said, okay, you can still, some people, some of the Jewish community will accept them, but what about us, right? Now that we know, it's not that we're looking for their acceptance, but it just shows you how these lines are starting to be drawn to exclude some people, just like they were excluding us back then. And I think it's right? If they keep on excluding and they find out we the people, then there's no going back to re-accept us, right? Re-accept other people back on our side. So even you hear the Igbos that we showed the video, how they were talking about their custom, even the Limba, right? They said that we're the original Israelites. Like, hey, we ancient. So, you know, we ain't lost. We was just scattered. We know who we are, right? We know how we are as a people. Even the Igbos say, why would we convert to something that we already are? And they say they're part of the 10 northern tribes. So they're like, why would the minority, which would be the southern tribes, dictate what to do with the majority, the 10 tribes from the north that actually went down to Africa, right? So it's very interesting now that some of these conversations and some of these things are being documented to show the distinction, and sometimes maybe those things might be reversed, right? Where it actually shows who we are and with proof versus, you know, what some of the other communities were trying to do to us. All right, thank you.
More going on here. Let's keep going. Exceptions were limited to those who were born in Judaism, as in their parents, having been married with Kodashim, that is properly according to Jewish law, or those who were married to whites. So the exception was, well, you can be buried there if your parents, particularly your mother, they were married. And we'll make an exception for those Israelites who are married to whites. So listen, in other words, very few, if any, blacks or mulattoes would have qualified for burial in the Jewish cemetery proper. Something to think about. As I said, we're going to unpack this as we go on. So listen, that so many blacks and mulattoes did receive burial in the segregated section of the Jewish cemetery after this ordinance reflects a communal rift when it came to treatment of slaves. So by this time, they were identifying those Israelites coming from Spain and Portugal as slaves because the trafficking was in full force at this time. So they were identifying them as slaves and creating or segregating things. So it was tough for those who would not convert, etc., or those who would not agree to marry outside of the Israelite community. So it says, while the Muhammadad or Muhammad, and I'm going to talk about this, wished to terminate the inclusion of blacks and mulattoes in Jewish life, individual owners clearly saw fit to continue including them. So in 1658, the Muhammad, it's not Muhammad, it's pronounced differently, Muhammad, I should say, decided that mulatto boys would no longer be admitted for study in the Amsterdam yeshiva of the Sephardim. So we're not going to allow these Israelite boys to be admitted for study. Based on a view expressed in the Talmud, some early medieval rabbis, as well as Maimonides, prohibited the teaching of Torah to one slave and ruled that such knowledge did not cause his liberation. So it's like, well, you really don't need to know Torah. You don't need to learn this, because even if you learn it, we're not going to set you free. Do you see how that this set up what was going on in the Americas later? It started here. So it says these 17th century mulattoes were not identified as slaves. However, the issue was their background. So remember, they didn't want to say they had slaves in Europe, in the Netherlands. They knew they were there. They knew they were Israelites, because it says they were not identified as slaves on record. It was their background. It was their identity as Israelites. So it says such an exclusion of others considered unworthy had other general precedents. Listen to this. The Jesuit College of St. Peter. Oh boy. When they show up, we know what's going down, right? The Jesuit College of St. Peter and St. Paul in Mexico City, founded in 1582. So we're talking almost 100 years earlier, had included in its constitution a clause expressly forbidding the admission of blacks and mulattoes. Indeed, since the mid-1500s, full-blooded American Indians and blacks were not allowed to receive holy orders or hold sacerdotal office. So what's the connection with the full-blooded American Indians and blacks? For these two groups, the full-blooded American Indians and blacks, they were not allowed. You all. Let's go on. Let's go on. I don't want to get off track. I want to dig into this a little deeper, into this Council of Muhammad. So it says, the 1638 founding document of the Kai Kadosh, Talmud Torah of Amsterdam, is well known as a merger agreement that brought three existing congregations together into one synagogue under one leadership council. And that's this council called the Muhammad. It bears the signature of 218 householding men of the Spanish and Portuguese Jewish nation in Amsterdam. So we know they're talking about Israelites. They managed to get 218 signatures saying they were agreeing to subject themselves to the authority of the new leadership. So if they are subjecting themselves to the authority of the leadership under this group, or this group, that tells you that the leaders in this group were not the true Israelites. They were another people. And they got these men, 218, to sign this agreement. How many of you think they did it willingly? We have the slave trade going on, segregation. Do you think they did it willingly? Just think about that. So it says, it is also well known that this document, along with the set of communal regulations drawn up later that year, granted nearly unfettered authority to the Muhammad. Looking at these two documents, along with an earlier one that established an umbrella government over the three congregations in 1622 and later references to them, there emerges a more nuanced view of how they functioned, both as political text and as documents in a working archive. So this group basically took over and they began implementing rules and laws, pretty much like the Pharisees. These were the Pharisees of the day. And they got these Portugal and Spanish Israelite men to sign this agreement to subject themselves to this council. Now let's go on. We're going to shift gears just a bit.
All right, so that's very important. I got to stop Lisa there because she, like I said, it's 2 hours. So it's wonderful information there that you'll receive if you go and watch the full thing. But some of the things there that's important to highlight that I was just, just made me go and look at some of my own DNA, because remember she was talking about Mexico and Peru and how some of the people were there. So that's very interesting. And, I'll remind you why in a few minutes once we finish showing this second part. But it just shows you all the laws and things that were changing. And even, I see, thank you, Akudi, Patricia, for sharing some of the information. Because, in Jamaica, I find cousins there that have the history and connecting, who we are as Israelites, from some of us from Spain and Portugal. And I'm able to find some of my cousins that have Jewish ancestry that lives in Jamaica, Barbados, and the Belize and other places, right? And I look at their documentation and they have connections to Jewish people in those areas too. But see, some of them I'm finding are like, more European descent Jews, right? And I was getting confused. So like, why am I seeing, these European Jews instead of Black Jews? And it's very important to understand what happened, because she was talking about the mixing, right? And then later on, I don't know if you saw that part because I was preoccupied with my computer, but they basically was basically encouraged to assimilate with some of the other. Oh, this is that part. We're not going to watch this all. But later on, you'll find out they encouraged the women to assimilate along with some of the black Jews, right? Portuguese Jews, to assimilate in with European Jews, right? To be accepted. So especially you see a lot of that simulation in Brazil, right? To thinking if you want to move up in life in a different class, you can marry within whites. It's a picture that they have, and it's very well known what was going on in the Brazil area with slaves and stuff. So it's very interesting to now connect that, right? So that's why this documentation, this information is so important. So I'm gonna play a little bit about this because this is very important about when did the big switch happen, right, in Europe. So listen very closely to this. We're not gonna play the whole thing, and y'all willing, we'll play some more of it next week because I got some other information I want to connect back to it. But listen very closely, and then we're going to get into the lesson. Won't play a lot of this.
So let's see what happened in 1655, because now we want to look at the forgotten port Jews of London, court Jews who were also port Jews. So in 1655, England went to war with Spain, with the consequence that Spanish merchants and their property in the country were rendered liable to seizure. So in March of 1656, the property of this man, Antonio Rodriguez, a merchant of Portuguese origin who was superficially a new Christian, was impounded by the authorities in London on the grounds that he was an enemy alien. So on 24 March 1656, 6 Iberian-born merchants, all former new Christians, who are we talking about, family, petitioned Oliver Cromwell, the head of state, asserting that they were Portuguese of the Hebrew nation and not Spanish. They wanted to separate themselves. Like, this is who we really are. So they sought to preempt measures against their conduct of trade and obtained permission to live and worship in London as Portuguese Jews. So in this démarche, the Portuguese Jews in London were driven to act by a threat to their mercantile interests. It's like, look, we got to stand up and say something or they're going to kick us out of business. We're going to lose our wealth, etc. So emerging openly as Jews was paradoxically the best way to parry the danger. Religious identity and maritime enterprise were fused. So it's like, okay, we're going to overlook some things because these people are wealthy, they're running businesses, they're bringing money in here. So we're just going to overlook some things, let them practice their religion for now. For now. Let's keep going and see what happens. Now, this part is extremely important. So from the mid-17th to the late 19th century, London's Jews were primarily engaged in the business of exchange. Whether as shopkeepers or brokers, they became respectable and valued members in business circles and the mercantile community. During the campaign for the relief of civil disabilities, the city was a stronghold of support for the Jewish cause. Yet, by the 1860s, the Port of London had been transformed and exchange had ceased to be its primary function. With the transformation of the port, the image of the merchant and the romance of exchange palled. So the port was now a place of transshipment, processing, and manufacture. It was crowded, filthy, and dangerous. In the last phase of the development of port cities, with which this essay is concerned, listen, Jews moved from being merchant who engaged in exchange to being commodities. Please don't miss this part because the author doesn't come out and tell you what happens. You have to read between the lines. Listen, the Jews moved from being merchants who were engaged in exchange to being commodities that were shipped from one place to another. Please tell me you got that. This is the politically correct way to say they forced them into slavery. And now we are shipping your behinds around the world. They became the property of the Europeans. The sword was chasing them, and they thought they escaped it. They thought they did. But listen to this, you all. From the 1880s, London was both a point of entry for mass-ish immigration from Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe. Who are we talking about? And a stopping off place for use en route to North or South America and South Africa. These Jews played no part in the mercantile community, and their fate was determined elsewhere. So our people, the ones who were doing it, they were replaced by these who were coming in from elsewhere, who basically just kind of stepped into those roles and took over. Now listen as I read some excerpts from this journal.
All right, so like I said, we'll stop here just because of the sake of time, but hopefully that was very important, and hopefully you understood what she just said, that the people who were the shipping people, the people who own the ships, end up becoming the cargo. So what do you sail on slave ships? Slaves, right? So, a lot of the merchant ships people talk about, I don't know if it's connected, but I know a lot of time people talk about the first slave ship to America was the slave ship Jesus, which is true, it was, but it was a merchant ship before it became a slave ship. So Jesus, slave ship Jesus. Might be Jesus, but I know a lot of people talk about that. So it's very interesting that, you know, if it's Jesus, that would actually, well, they've named a lot of their a lot of the ships after biblical people. And it's interesting the fact that, you know, you hear the fact that some of, not sure if it's with that ship, but some of the merchants end up becoming the ones enslaved, right? So in Spain, right? So Jesus would be Spanish, right, for Jesus. So the ones that are getting getting enslaved in the same time is talking about how the people who were shippers, that they were basically also being enslaved as well and taking their business taken over, right? So I find that very interesting. So hopefully that helps. But the next part, she's going to talk a little bit more about the islands and stuff. So I don't want to carry on too long during this session. But if y'all allows us, then, you know, next session I want to add some stuff to that too. But for right now, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so it's interesting because she talks about London. So in London, we'll talk a little bit about this, y'all willing. I got to do some more research. So people, you know, that good researcher. So I see Akudi, Patricia, you like to do a lot of good research. So help me research some of this about the Black British. So in the Black Brits, there's some history that just came out a couple of 5 or 6 years ago. Shows you that a lot of stuff, again, doesn't come to our community about these Black British people that lived, was actually, they were there before slavery, before, during the medieval times that they've been there. They're down there finding references of how they were living there for so long, longer than people think, that these Black Brits were there. Next slide. So these are some of the things that talks about that. BBC, so that's credited, right, to some degree. But they're calling the Tudors, because Black Tudors, because that was a city that a lot of them lived in that was actually documented. And they were documented to, you know, play the trumpets for Henry VIII. They worked for the Queen. And they were like divers for like, you know, they were good swimmers. So they were like divers and stuff to get some of the stuff, the jewels and pearls and all that kind of stuff. So it's very important to understand some of the history that was there. And it's even more interesting because my family has a tradition in our family that my grandma used to say that we were free slaves, which slave can't be free. But basically that we were indentured Black people. We're still treated horribly, looking at some on that side. I looked at some of the documents and how they were basically giving out resources and stuff to, you know, get one pair of shoes and all that stuff. And they used to lend the people out to go work for other people. But after we got our freedom, we inherited, well, that's just like indentured, you get a lot of land, right? So, but the question is, how were we Black people before slavery? How were we indentured Black people from Britain? That's what part kind of confused me. But it's interesting that I was finding some cousins that was in that area as well. So, you know, is there something going on with that connection? Because that's the same family that I have my Black Portuguese heritage on as well. And my great grandma spoke Portuguese, so here in North Carolina, and had family to come visit her. And we'll get into that next week, y'all willing. But you know, the fact that they only will marry within like Native Americans and free Blacks, you know, kind of like some of the history there. They were just trying to stay within that certain class. And looks like my grandma definitely married somebody who came from more of a slave history, who's my grandfather. But you can see, you know, some of those same colorisms and categories even came over to America too. It just didn't happen just because two people, you know, that was a part of it when they married with the somebody, the enslaver slept with the slave and had a different category. But then there was free Blacks that was around too. All right, it's very important to understand some of that history. Might be some of your family history too. So next. And it's important because, you know, this is a book that I had found that I read and did some history and put some information out in our community about that. But you can see here that there's this lady, you know, this Carolina Genesis is about genealogy of different families that have this mixed heritage. And it talks about this Rachel Moore and the matriarch of the family through her Moor relatives. So sometimes Moor actually means M-O-O-R, Moor, as in the Moor, like some of the stuff I've shared about my family. And my Moors were actually free blacks during the 1600s, right around Jamestown. How are you a free black person when slavery started in 1619? And they actually found my family member a little bit there after slavery, where a lot of the Moors were actually, and Moor could be anybody from North Africa, not just Moor as in religion, but they actually were taken to Virginia as free people. So that's a whole nother story as well. But anyway, you can see how the history is in this Goose Creek, South Carolina, and home to Indian slave traders from Barbados. So that's interesting, right? Indian slave traders from Barbados. And then it says these for Goose Creek men. So somebody got some research. You do good at research. Look up who these Goose Creek men were, as they were known. Also engaged in the forced labor of poor whites, and had access to the slave markets of Charleston, South Carolina, New England for generations. So, here you see this slave connection of the people in Barbados, right, South Carolina, and England as well, right? So that's interesting. So I think somebody in last week's comments talked about how the black people come over here and, maybe it was the 2 videos ago, how the black people over here are able to own slaves and stuff, right? Because all black people did not have the same history when we first came over here, but after 400 years of integration, we're now the same people, right? That's why I have all these different histories from a black standpoint of my family. But you can also see here where it talks about later on, Huger owned by the mulatto carpenters, George and Ned. Owned by mulatto carpenters, George and Ned, that later my great-great-grandfather Ned was a Portuguese Jewish sailor, right? So Ned was a black Portuguese Jewish sailor and shipbuilder from the Cape Verde Islands. That's where the black Jews, Portuguese Jews, one of the places they were taken to was Cape Verde. His plight was one of tragedy when South Carolina routinely captured non-European sailors and held them as slaves. Same thing, that the person that were the sailors, the ones that was manning the ship, end up becoming the cargo. Until evidence was produced sufficient enough to liberate them, they fell victim to enslavement of free seamen of color. That's maritime people, right? Maritime means you do something on the water. When he was not able to provide a certificate of his free status. So free black people from Spain, Portugal, Cape Verde were coming over here, and then they had no documentation, especially after the Revolutionary War, well, Civil War too. They were giving people papers that fought in the war. Black people who found freedom, they were giving them papers. If you didn't have a paper, guess what happens? And you're not a free person, right? So there's a lot of that stuff that actually happened back in the day, that a lot of people who were free blacks end up becoming slaves just because you look just like everybody else, right? You're all black. So next. So, this is a story we talked about as well last week. We still haven't played it again. We played it in the past, but we'll play it again here soon. But just want to show, just remember that story. Here's next slide, where she's talking about her family and how she said they were raised as Portuguese Jews, right? And where she says she's from, the same Georgetown area. Her family is Kohen. Kohen means priest for the Jewish people. They're saying that basically Kohanim, even in the Bible, Kohen means you're a priest. So she basically talks about the Portuguese Jews of Georgetown, Beaufort, Barnwell, I don't know those places, Edisto, and Charleston. So if you know something about those places, please, send some information in for us. In Chatham County, Georgia, in archives, libraries. So these place things in archives, libraries, and listening to old family stories told in oral traditions, remembering secret Judaic rituals learned at home as a child, taught by her mother and Georgetown family. See another thing about this Georgetown area, right, coming up. And then you see how they connect with Gullah Geechees and so forth. But next. And then, she says it again, our Portuguese native Cherokee and Geechee family in Georgetown, South Carolina, from Sierra Leone and West Africa. It was a mixture, right? All right, just want to show you that. We'll get more into her later. So next. And then this is my DNA, right? Talk about Spain and Portugal, right? Mixed with Native American and Angolan, and then later on you see Britain and Nigeria and some of the other things that came more modern. But these are, the older they say, at least in 23andMe, this is the old test. Those are your older relatives, and when it mixed in with those DNA as you timelines start going ahead. So next. Oh, it didn't show it. Okay, hold on for a second. I had another slide in there. I don't know why I didn't show it. Can you refresh it? Possibly like we did last time. So I want to also show you there's some other stuff that's there. Do I need to close it on my side? So there's some other stuff that's there. Okay, let me see. I'll close it on mine. I close mine. So yeah.
I'm gonna try it.
Go back up. Go up again. Yeah, it's not there. Can you close yours and open it back up? Will it cause a problem?
Yeah, I can do it.
All right. So we're going to show, because there's something I really want to show you because as I was listening to the video, it made me think of some stuff that I was like, oh, there's a connection there that I didn't even realize. And one of those connections was because like in my true heritage DNA, I remember something strange happening where they basically updated. You know how you get those updates if you do yes, I see somebody put the Melungeons. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that next Shabbat, y'all willing. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, it's there. All right, scroll back up.
Go back up.
Up some more. Yeah, keep on going up. Okay, that's where. Go up one more time. Just make sure I didn't add something in there I missed. Okay, yeah. All right, go down. So this is what happened. My heritage, I remember showing, it showed like that I had some DNA coming from like Peru and Chile and Mexico kind of area. Then all of a sudden there was an update and it changed that from being from 4% Mesoamerican and Edina to being to Portuguese DNA. So it changed that group. You can see it's 4.6 there, and then it changed to something about 4.9 being Portuguese. And I was like, why did that happen? That's strange, right? That all of a sudden it's just switched over from one to the other. So, it's just like she was talking about how some of those black Portuguese Jews were living in that area. And that's where I have some of my Belize cousins that I'm just finding out about. And I heard some people write about, some of the black Jews and some of the slavery that happened in that area as well. So I'm like, wow, right there. Right when I listen to the video again this time, I got some more information. So next, and this is my DNA all around the world, right? So they said you can see it there too when it talks about the same area in Peru in that, western side of South America. It said my DNA was there, but you also can see up in the second half, it starts talking about Iberian, right? Iberian is Spain, Portugal. So it's saying in North Africa. See, now on Ancestry.com, it won't show some of these areas, right? So, that's why I tell people if I'm taking different tests, make sure you take the different tests to understand. But as, people said, 4 corners, right? 4 corners, our DNA has been spread out throughout the world that Yah is going to pull us back from those areas. You even see there, it has what they call now, at least as the Middle East, and that purple there. What's my DNA doing there, right? So it's very important to understand these things. So next. And then one of the things that's interesting, you can't hardly see it, but on the left side, it had a connection to the Miwok Native Americans. And I was like, how is my DNA connected to Miwok people, which are a Californian Native American tribe? And I'm like, how would we be connected to Californian Native Americans? But found out that the black Portuguese and the black, Iberia, I'm just called Iberia because Iberia, was the old place where Spain and Portugal was actually connected together. But Afro-Iberians, during that time, they end up becoming, after you run them out the country, what are you going to do, right? They're going to become like ship people, sailors, pirates, and all these different people. And it even talked about how some of them actually went to Hawaii, to California, and then they came to Mexico, and then there was a connection going back up to like Massachusetts and North Carolina as well. And then, my history, when I start looking at Yaya Negro, if y'all know about Benea's, information that he shared, I start looking up the family that's connected to them. And names like Rodriguez, as she was talking about, I have people in my family connected to Puerto Rico and places named Rodriguez and Perez and some of those families that are connected to that. And even with the map that from Emmanuel Bowen talking about Negro land, some of the people from King David and the Black Portuguese were also taken to that area. And also to Sao Tome, Sao Tome Principe, where they talk about the first group of the children was taken and sent to that island. That after freedom, they were given freedom, a lot of them actually went up to Benin and other places where I found some of my cousins that taught me this. And they became like the more, because they had all these trades and money. So they became more the elite people in that area. I think they call it judos or something. But they basically now are the people that, so it just shows you the line. They actually end up having even some, kind of subjugating some other people after they were subjugated themselves. So there's a lot of that history that is just amazing when you start connecting the dots also. So next, I think in my father's line, right? So this is my father's DNA. It's just talking about E1B1A. And you can see there where it says that second sentence, E1B1A, also known as M291EP1, and often referred to as EM2, a branch of the E1B1A father line, which is itself a part of the larger grouping of E father lines found across much of Africa, Southern Europe. That's where Iberia is, Southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, and the Middle East. Putting all those three places together, right? E1B1A. So it's very important that we understand some of that history as well, even as part of the slave trade and the multiple migrations also. So it's good to see. Shabbat Shalom. Let me see. R.C. Smith. Oh, thank you for the resource there. Appreciate that. We're going to have to write that down. And Shabbat Shalom. Great Daji. Them Malungans. Yes, Malungans. So Malungans here in North Carolina, Tennessee. A lot of history here with that too. And Jay Kohanim. Oh, Jay Kohanim. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us as well. So we can see there's a lot of this history and stuff that's going on. So we need to, that's why I said it's important for us to come together to understand the history, no matter what our religious differences and beliefs are. What about the history? I think that's one way we can come together. And then from there, we can talk about, what this means for us as a people, right? But until we get our history known, this understood, and where we're confident in it, where nobody can sway us, then we can actually go to the next step to talk about what this means of us coming back together, right? But all these different groups, like the Black Jews, they got some information, right? Some Black Christians, as we talked about, even with Fred Price Jr. He had, even his dad used to say we were Israelites, even way back in the day, if you know about his church back in the day in California. We have some people from the Muslim belief, right, system that knows, like I said, in Africa and other places that, or even here in America, like some of my cousins, from the town where I'm from, they say they also know about the Black Jewish heritage. And we're trying now that we, found out, I put stuff in genealogy groups, and they say they want to write a book and stuff about it. And they, from the same families that talk about in some of these books and some of these lines as well. So it's so important for us to do that now, and then see where y'all is going to take us. So next. So I want to make sure we got time for the lesson. All right. So for the lesson today, thank you for your time there. Yeah, Shabbat Shalom, Divine. I think it said hey, but thanks for joining out. If you don't mind, some of that stuff in those screenshots, we try and get some of the resources and stuff, because books and stuff that I might not have seen before. And at the same time, I try to make sure I don't get caught up too much and make sure we finish the lesson for the day. All right. So for the lesson for the day, let me pull mine back up since I had to close it. We're going back and talking about the timeline. So the timeline is important about, where we are and what Yah is trying to do from our past and now into the future. So I won't be able to see the comments now. So got my slides up just to let y'all know. All right. So here we have next slide. So same thing, fair use. I'll go back. I just want to make sure this is in there because I sometimes cut up the video. So fair use, same type of thing. We're just doing this for teaching, scholarship, news reporting, and so forth. All right, so next. All right, so going into Genesis 15. So we're talking about the timeline. We talked a little bit about the timeline at the mountain of Mount Horeb and what happened with some of the covenants. So we're still kind of overlaying some of those things because it's so important that we get some of the historical stuff in the Bible, not just from our history of modern day, from 1492 to now, but what about the history and what was said about our people from way back when? All right, so we know we started with Abraham. Abraham was the big one. You know, we got Shem and all that, but Abraham was when the covenant was actually given to our people. So we know that in Genesis 15, we can see that when Yah was speaking to Abraham, right, he was basically talking to him about what's going to happen in the future to his people and the covenant that he was given unto him. Right. And then he talked about now look towards the heavens and count the stars, and if you're able to count them. And he said to them, so shall your descendants be. So it's going to be a lot like the stars. Right. And then he believed in Yahuwah and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. So because that he believed in Yahuwah and, wholeheartedly, not halfway, that Yah counted as righteousness, even to the point where he was willing to offer up his son Isaac, and Yah blessed him, right? So here it talks about when the sun was going down and how vision, a dream, you can call it, right? So just like I said, sometimes Yah talks to our people through visions and dreams as well, but not to get carried away, because sometimes people have so many of them, and there is a belief back in the day where people got so caught up in their dreams and visions, they removed themselves from Yah's word. Right. And even in the Bible, Yah said, these are not my dreams. This is something people made up. He was talking about some of the prophets and stuff, how they were making stuff up. So you got to be careful with that too. But in verse 13, it says, and Yah said to Abraham, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they'll be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. And we know there's a lot of different beliefs around that 400 years, calculations and stuff, which I think my wife was talking about. Some people were asking about the calculation. We're going to have a quick Q&A about that too. So it then says, but I will also judge a nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you will be buried at a good old age. So it just shows you that even Abraham, even though he had this vision, that he wasn't able to see it all fulfilled in his lifetime, at least here on earth, right? And then he says, then in the fourth generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. So it shows you that Yah was still dealing with the Amorites, right? That he had something going on with them where he couldn't just replace them. Like he was giving them time to whatever sin that they were dealing with, because we all came off the ship. We all came from Noah. So everybody, Noah had clean animals, right? And unclean animals. So there were some things that Noah knew and his sons, but really all three of them went astray, because even Abraham is coming out of his father's house, and that they are, he's getting rid of their gods, their false gods and stuff, right? He's basically giving his life and devoting his life to Yah from a pagan family, right? So kind of like what some of us are doing, coming out of some of those, Christmas, and we know that Easter is a name of a false goddess. We coming out of those things, right, into a newness of life that Yah is basically, meeting us to where we are to take us to where he wants us to be, just like he did with Abraham. So that's what he's doing now, right? It's part of some of the prophecies that's going on now that was spoken of long ago. Then in verse 17, it says, and it came about when the sun had set that it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between two pieces. On that day, Yahuwah made a covenant. So this is the covenant made with Abraham, saying to your descendants, I have given this land from the river of Egypt as far as the river, as far as the great river, river Euphrates. The Canaanite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Rephaim, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. So Yah basically is determining his territories of what's actually was going to occur, and all the land that was going to be given to the descendants there, right? So from the Euphrates, from Egypt to the Euphrates, the great river, that what he was talking about, at least at that time, right? And then he talked about the different nations that actually was living in those areas as well, which mostly of those are, most of them are Canaanites. All right. So next, so we know that hasn't actually been done yet, right? That hasn't been all fulfilled, because we can see in that same day, he says, I've given you from the great river. So we can see the places that Abraham left from Ur on the right, and how he basically went up to Haran. Haran is actually the name of his brother that died in Ur. So some people believe that his people basically named that place Haran after the dead brother, the father of Lot. And then they went down into Syria, Damascus. We know that Syria was a lot of times talked about even in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament. Talked about the Damascus. Even Syria was a place where Antioch, right? Antioch was in Syria, right? The place they say they first called them Christians, but nobody talks about what they called them before they called them Christians, right? All the way up to that point. But then they went to Shechem. Shechem is a place that I've been talking a lot about, right? Shechem was that one man that actually raped Dinah, the sister of the Israelite men, boys, right? That ended up getting revenge. And then Hebron, and then they went out. That's where I want to say Abraham and even Jacob. Make sure I got that right. Yeah, Jacob asked to be buried. It was back in that area, right after they went to Egypt. And then they start coming back, right, with Moses. And so, but all that place that that's all the place Abraham went. You can see how that lines up with the map, similar at the one at the bottom, right? That territory that he walked was very similar. At least the northern part is the area where, some of the promises were basically given, from the Nile to the Euphrates. So we can see how big of a mass that was, from at least from a northern standpoint. And the next slide, we can see how there's different interpretations of that. That some people think that they only got the upper section. Some people think it goes all the way up to Turkey, but you can see somewhere within that area is basically what was promised to our people. All right. So next. So it's very interesting because you see Netanyahu, a lot of times they talk about just the Muslims that say, chant from the river to the sea, that they won't be taken over. But you can see how Netanyahu had a map that he showed about the new Middle East that he's trying to suggest needs to be done. And people say that he did it intentionally. We talked about this before, but this is the area that he's saying this is the new Middle East. So a lot of the war and stuff that's going on in right now is connected to this. So we can see issues with Sudan, and now even Israel was having some problems with Egypt, and even some of the other nations that's in that midst, right? So next, I'll go more into that. But then it said in Numbers, when Moses was talking to the Israelites, because remember Moses did not make it to the promised land, he started talking about the border. So in the first Numbers 34 verse 1, it says, Yahuwah spoke to Moses, saying, command the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land of the Canaan, this is the land that shall fall to you as an inheritance, even the land of Canaan according to its borders, right? So now there's a specific area as they are going into the land. It's not the full land as we saw in the earlier account, but he basically starts setting the territories. I won't go through all these different places. It's a good study if you're interested. That he basically dedicated that we can see now that's more closer in line with the modern day borders of Israel. Not all of them, because King Solomon and stuff, he had a vast area, and even the southern part of Judea was actually part of the Edomite territory that I believe John Hyrcanus, during the time of that Maccabean Hanukkah period, that he forced them to convert to being Jews. So we'll talk about that later too. So after he says all this, in verse 13 says, so Moses commanded the sons of Israel, saying, this is the land that you are to apportion by lot among you as a possession, which Yahuwah has commanded to give to the 9.5 tribes. So remember in the story, right, there was Reuben Gad, and it said the half tribe of Manasseh. They said, we want this land versus the land that Yah had given, well, really dedicated for them to have. So they wanted theirs on the other side of the Jordan. They decided to get theirs on the other side. So the other tribes, the 9.5, they got theirs when they went over across the Jordan. And it said that, that Moses said, these other, y'all have to help the other ones fight for their land too, or, y'all will curse you basically. So that's important to also keep track of too. So next slide. So when we see the land on the left, it's important to understand why you see 2 yellows, right? 2 yellows was Manasseh. So the half tribe, the 2 half tribes, right? So that's on the other side of the Jordan. At least this is in what people say today. I'm not a geographer or nothing like that, so I don't know if this is accurate, but based upon at least what I've seen, this is where we're coming from. All right. And then you can see Gad is also on the other side, right? You can see that, right? The lighter blue. And then you can see like that brown over there by Ammon, that's supposed to be Reuben. So you can see that they got their territory on the right side, where the other 9.5 got theirs on the left. And then the Levites, right? The Levites were not given a territory except within the land, each one of the individual tribes' land, right? So each one of them had a connection there. So we can see, if we look on the right side, what that means for modern day, right? What happened. So we can see that the half tribe, Reuben and Gad, all that's now considered to be the Jordan. It's not part of the current state of Israel. And then you can see the land of where Amalek was, the Amalekites, and you can see that's now part of Israel, right, as well. So it's interesting. You can see Gaza, the Gaza Strip, where it used to be Philistia. So all that is important to understand. The West Bank, right, where they talk about now after a lot of the Israeli government fought against Gaza. Now it seems like there's something happening in the West Bank there also, and that's where I believe, is that where Hebron is? I think that's where Hebron. I can't see it on this map because it's don't know if it's even mentioned. But a lot of the different places that's actually mentioned in the biblical times is also over there in the West Bank too. All right. And then you got Lebanon that sits right on top of that. So Lebanon, that in some of the prophecies it talks about Tyre and Sidon, right? So that's in Lebanon even to this day. All right. So it's very an understand prophecy to understand some of those different places. All right, so next slide. So it actually talks about when Moses was talking to the people, he says, behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. So he already set forth an angel to actually be before them to fight for the people. And he said, be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious towards him, for he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. So that's interesting, right? The fact that he says his name is in him, and now he's saying that the angel, that they need to obey the angel's voice. Like, who is this angel? It doesn't say, so I don't like to add to, but I know there's a lot of different theories out there. But it says that they need to listen to the angel and do not be rebellious toward him. In verse 22, it says, but if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy them. You shall not worship their gods, nor serve them, nor do according to their deeds, right? So now Yah is pulling us out from the other side, even though our ancestors didn't listen and, broke, their part of the covenant. Now Yah is still holding on to his part of the covenant. And now he's bringing us from the four corners of the people where we got to now get rid of those things, right? To come back into the original state that he had placed us in that covenant with him, right? From my ancestors. So he talks about, but you shall utterly overthrow them and break their sacred pillars in pieces. But you shall serve Yahuwah, your El, and he will bless your bread and your water, and I will remove sickness from your midst. So this is what I read at the beginning of service, right? so that where there wouldn't even be miscarrying or barren in your land, and I will fill the number of your days. So it's very important that we return to the covenant that Yah had for us. And this time he said he has a new covenant, right, with Israel and Judah as well. So it's very important where he's going to write those things on our heart, right? Like, you no longer need teachers and stuff, right? So it's very important that we return. This is what is happening now, because Yah wants us to obey his voice and do what his will. Now, it doesn't say in this story, in this part of history, I would say, I don't like calling it story, but in this part of history, it doesn't talk about Yahusha, but now it's about us obeying Yahusha's voice, right? To return to the one that he set for us to be redeemed through, to enter and back into his paradise. So that's why it's so important for us to understand that too, right? Because our ancestors that was a given account rejected him, and when they rejected him, the same thing happened. We were cursed, right, as a people. So that what we even asked for the curse to be on that, our ancestors said based upon their descendants, which is terrible. But our people always are doing that, right? And we even say, what's that thing? I promise on my mama's grave, right? And all that crazy stuff that we used to say back in the day. For some of y'all that are older out there. But in verse 27, it says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion all the people among whom you come. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs on you to you. I will send hornets ahead of you so that they will drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites before you. I will not drive them out before you in a single year. Listen, that the land may not become desolate and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. I will drive them out before you little by little until you become fruitful and take possession of the land. So y'all had a plan where he was going to slowly make us a people to take over the land, because he said if he knocked out everything else of all the people, then what's going to hold the beast and all that stuff from taking over the land until he's ready to give it to us, right? So that was the issue, is that like now, like Yah has a plan now that he slowly is basically happening now. If we're obedient to what he's telling us to do, he will basically drive us to those next steps, because his plan is going to happen with or without us, with the remnant or without, without the majority, right? There's going to be a remnant, it says, that will basically enter in, right? That he's trying to now to deal with our heart, where there it was talking about obedience. Now it's talking about the willingness to serve him after having these Bibles for all these decades, thousands of years, that we had it, and we still are not doing the things that he's called us to do with it, right? So in 31, I will fix your boundary. So here's that boundary from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines. So talking about the Gaza Strip, and from the wilderness of the river Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. You should make no covenant with them or with their Elohims, gods, right? So it's important that we're not making covenant with false gods. So that's why I got a problem with frats and sororities, because a lot of those vows or pledges, you're pledging to false gods, right? A lot of things in masonry, you're basically aligning yourself to make a pledge or a covenant with those gods that's at the top of that pyramid, or God at the top, if those who are Mason would know who the God at the top is. So in verse 33, it says, they shall not live in your land, because they will make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it surely will be a snare to you. So he's telling them, hey, your dedication, your devotion to Yah is the important thing, that he's going to watch over you. He's going to make things, and it's like, are you going to trust in him? And that happens today, right? Are we trusting what Yah is telling us to do? Not what our thoughts are telling us, but based upon the word, right? So, that's one of the things, like, we all can't be right. Everybody can't have different feast days and calendars and Sabbaths and stuff, but we're working towards that, where he's going to, in due time, little by little, he will work those things out. But what about in your personal life when it comes to your devotion to him? Are you still sinning? The stuff that we know. You're still smoking. You're fornicating, right? You commit adultery. You're doing those things that Yah told us not to do in your personal life, right? That, he's slowly trying to cleanse us. But just because we know the word and we know the people, don't mean that we in Yah's right standing, right? That we have to be obedient to him. And that's what's very important, because he's trying now to prepare the land where we'll never get removed from. We'll always be there. But like he said in Ezekiel 20, we talked about that. Hopefully you looked at last video too from yesterday, that it says Ezekiel 20 that, you know, he's going to pass under that rod, and the rebels is not going to make it to the land after he brings us to the wilderness. So are you a rebel when it comes to your hearts, right? He even says he wants to circumcise our heart. Now, I know woman can't be circumcised, at least not in the righteous way that y'all want, but everybody's heart can be circumcised, right? He said, remove the foreskins of your heart. So is your heart in the right place? No matter how much big head knowledge you got, are you being mean? You know, I be talking about people on Facebook sometimes, I mean on YouTube or Facebook too, how to be so angry about, you know, trying to fuss about who's right and what's wrong. That's not an humble standpoint. That's pride, right? To fight and to call people names, and that's not part of y'all. You want to live in a promised land or in a New Jerusalem where you got people that's dealing still like that. You think that's acceptable for y'all? No, right? So we got to get that stuff out, even our daily living. Not just talking about no YouTube and stuff like that, but how we interact with people, right? Yah says that we need to be our conducts among the Gentiles should be good, right? So he doesn't basically come, his wrath won't be judging us, will be only judging them. But how's your conduct, right? How's your attitude? How's your thinking? Those are the things that we need to be really talking about at this phase right now, what we have control of. Now, with everything that's going on in the world with Trump and Israel fighting Iran and Russia, we can't, you know, we can't do much of that, right? You can try to vote and do stuff, but we should solve the Supreme Court just rig some stuff, right? Where it's going to be not helpful for our people. And they're still doing stuff now, which I try to warn people about the 14th Amendment. I told people a long time ago, keep your eye on that, right? Same thing I told people, keep your eye on the Iran war, right, in 2019 when I was trying to warn people based on the Bible. I'm no prophet or nothing. I'm just reading the scripture. Just follow what the scripture says, right? Persia is going to be against the people, our people in the last days, right? So there's going to be some kind of alliance that happens. If you trust in the word, you know, eventually, with due time, it's going to happen. All right, so next. So this is going back even to that person, that angel, captain of hosts. So in Joshua 15 and 12, it says, the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield in the land of Canaan during that year. So, you know, we're getting close to even with Sukkot, first fruits and stuff, right? So it says, now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no, rather I indeed come now as captain of hosts of Yahuwah. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said to him, what has my master to say to his servant? So it's very interesting that a lot of people in Christendom, as Israelites, as you know, everybody talks about this passage, like the fact that Joshua bowed down to this captain of hosts, right? Why did the angel, as we talked about in Bible study, for those that actually attend Bible study, that we talked about, you know, how in Revelation that the John went down to bow to the angel, and he said, no, don't bow down. You're just like me. You know, we all worship the same God. Why did this captain of hosts at least allow him to bow down to him? You know, what you know, it's good to look at the Hebrew there too. What word for bow down is that basically using in reference to the other parts where other people bow down as well, right? So that helps us to stop so much different doctrines to understand, and we won't go into it today. But verse 15, it says, the captain of Yahuwah of hosts said to Joshua, remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy. So why is it holy, the place that he was standing, right? Is it because the angel was there? Is it because, you know, where Yah wanted to put his presence just like he did with Moses at the burning bush? Why is this also in the same type of standpoint, you know, kind of looked at in that way? And Joshua did so. So next slide. So we're just talking about the timeline today. But then it says, you know, after they did all that, went up to the mountain and all that stuff, right? The people did the golden calf. And then it says in Exodus 33, when Moses said, it says, then Yahuwah spoke to Moses, depart, go up from here, and you and the people whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. I will send an angel. He talks about it again. I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanite, Amorites, Hittites, and Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey. So after they did wrong, golden calf, he still said he's going to send the angel before the people to drive out. So once again, just because we didn't keep our part of the covenant, it doesn't mean that Yah doesn't keep his. So I use that as examples, like Yah people was not replaced during this time. Right after they are given the covenant, they go up to the mountain. Yes, Yah will be your people, will do what you say. And then, the whole golden calf and stuff. And now Yah is still keeping his covenant with the people. He didn't destroy it. So, he says that, going back to verse 3, for I will not go up in your midst, because you are an obstinate people, and I might destroy you on the way. Y'all said, look, y'all gonna be, I can't choose. You know how those people you stay with, you're like, man, I can't be here. He my boy, he my cousins. I just can't be around him because I know we're gonna be fighting and stuff, right? Y'all's like, hey, I can't be around you because y'all people are just so bad. So now, like, when it comes to his presence in our life, right, where are we with, like I said, how we can be part of sin and expect for his promises to restore us as a people, right? Like that same obstinate people, hard-headed, thick, stiff-necked people that love sin, love gravitate to other worship, to other stuff in the countries that we've been pushed to, right? Those are the things that's hurting us. So now Yah wants us to come from those things so his presence can come back to us and that he will rise up. So just read Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, right? He talks a lot about that, about, when he's going to come, like, hey, you want to go serve all them gods and pour out your drink offering? Why don't you go to them? Like, why are you coming to me now? Right? Like, but he's still going to do what he says because of his namesake, going back to Ezekiel 20. So verse 4 says, when the people heard this sad word, they went into mourning, and none of them put on his ornaments. For Yahuwah had said to Moses, say to the sons of Israel, you are obstinate people. Should I go up in your midst for one moment? I would destroy you. Now, therefore, put off your ornaments from you, that I may know I may know what I shall do with you. So it's like, they have to take off ornaments. You were talking about jewelry or something. So, what does that mean? As we talked about, even, where the Jacob and his descendants, removed the earrings and stuff and basically took all that and put it under the tree before they became the people and cleansed themselves. It's like, we got to understand some of that too, right? So the sons of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. All right, so next. And this is important as well because, they're at Gilgal where a lot of this was actually being happening, right? So in Joshua 14:16, the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua in Gilgal. And that's when Caleb asked him for, Caleb, the son of Jephthah, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know the word which Yahuwah spoke to. So that's when Judah was basically given the promise, when he came to ask for his inheritance at Gilgal. But Judges too, so, Joshua, Judges, right? So Judges is the next book after Joshua. It says, now the angel of Yahuwah came up from Gilgal. So the place that they were encamping the whole time, now they're in the promised land. And it says the angel of Yahuwah came from Gilgal to Bochum. And he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn to your fathers and said, I will never break my covenant with you. He said, I will never break it. And as for you, you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You should tear down their altars, but you have not obeyed me. What is this you have done? Therefore, I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they will become a thorn in your sides, and their Elohims will be a snare to you. When the angel of Yahuwah spoke these words to all the sons of Israel, the people lifted up their voice and wept. So they named the place Bochum, and there they sacrificed to Yahuwah. So it shows you once again that Yah, even after they left the mountain and golden calf, after they got to the land, the same thing, right? So that's what Yah is trying to make us holy, which means separate, right? Separate, right? He wants to make us Kadesh, holy, to separate ourselves from these things that he is against, but yet we continue to intermingle ourselves through religion, false religion of worship, syncretism, which I was saying at the beginning of, how Fred Price was talking about. We don't have to do those things that Yah is called, but people say it's okay to do the pagan practices that was mixed in, but we're not supposed to do the things of Yah that points about who Yahushua is and what he's going to be coming to do through each feast days in the last day, right? So, it's important for us to know all that. And then we can see, in the same place, Gilgal later on became the place that they anointed Saul as king, where it became the center, one of the centers of the place that they found to, hear from Yah in that same place. But it's interesting that the angel came up from Gilgal to meet where the people were in Bachem, right? So who's this angel? What is this angel? What is this presence? All being mentioned over and over and over again. All right. So next slide. So going back to the boundaries and stuff, right? So these are some of the instructions was given to the answers as we enter into the land. So we're talking about that timeline, right? He says, then Yahuwah will drive out all these nations from before you. So this is the promise that was given back in Deuteronomy 11. And you will dispossess the nations greater and mightier than you, because you got that angel, right? Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your border will be from the wilderness of Lebanon. So we talked about where Lebanon was, right? We talked about that today. Sidon. You start looking at Joel, right? Chapter 2, I think, when it talks about, those who were basically put us in slavery, right? And then it says, and from the river Euphrates, as far as the western sea. So the river to the sea, it's talking about that. So no man will be able to stand before you, and Yahuwah, your El, will lay the dread on for of you and the fear of you on all the land which you set foot, as he's spoken to you. Right. So he basically said that the places that his presence is going to be what's going to give us the power, not our own plans and stuff. Right. Is his presence. This is basically listening to his voice, listen to those who basically direct us, not some cult leader, but to those that he's basically grooming up. Is he going to raise up in these times? And that we'll know that it's him, right? You don't have to guess just because somebody sounds good. I always say sometimes people talk loud and voiceful and people just follow them. And that's what gets us into cults and all kind of craziness. But it should be based upon the word, right? So in verse 26 says, see, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you listen to the commandments of Yahuwah, your El, which I am commanding you today. And the curse, if you do not listen to the commandments of Yahuwah, your El, but turn aside from the way which I'm commanding you today by following other Elohims, which you have not known, right? Have not known, right? So even in America, when we came here, we didn't know about all these European holidays. All those European holidays are based upon Roman, right, beliefs. And a lot of those Roman beliefs had gods associated. March, Mars, right? We're in May. Maya. Look up the goddess Maya, Mother's Day. Right? She was the mother goddess. So that's why I tell people, go back and look at some of those other videos where we basically break down a lot of the holidays. That's not holy days, right? For in verse 29, it shall come about when Yahuwah, your El, brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and you shall place the blessings on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal. So it's very important to understand, because it says, are they not across the Jordan, west of the way towards the sunset, in the land of the Canaanites who live in Arabah, opposite Gilgal? So we just talked about what Gilgal was, right? Live in Arabah, beside the oaks of what? Moreh. So it talks about, Moreh is a Canaanite teacher, by a tree, by oak. So why are we calling ourselves Canaanite teachers? I just, a lot of stuff we get from Judaism, and I just don't know, why we need to vet out a lot more than we're vetting out. That I think things that people just anti-Christians, and they're like, oh, Christianity, stay away from that. But they don't realize a lot of the stuff in Judaism is pagan from Babylonia and Canaan and all kind of places too. So we got to vet those things out as well. But it says, for you are about to cross the Jordan to go and to possess the land which Yahuwah, your El, is giving you, and you shall possess it and live in it, and you shall be careful to do all the statutes and judgments which I'm setting before you today. So that's very important, the things that Moses was given today, right? That's what he keeps on saying, these things that was given today. All right, so next. So that's when we get into the Deuteronomy 28 blessings and curses. We can see the same thing in Deuteronomy 11. Gerizim and Ebal is actually mentioned in Deuteronomy 27. You see Gerizim and Ebal, right? And then later on, we'll see even in Joshua, Gerizim and Ebal. All right, so let's see what Deuteronomy 27 says, because a lot of people are talking about Deuteronomy 28, What about Deuteronomy 27 that leads to 28? All right, so next. So we can see in Deuteronomy 27, the first verse, it says, Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I commanded you, what? Today. That time was very important. So it shall be on the day when you cross the Jordan to the land which Yahuwah your El gives you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and coat them with lime. Remember we talked about some of those stones some people think that's out there 2 Shabbats ago? And it says, and write on them all the words of this law. And when you cross over, so that you will enter the land which Yahuwah your El gives you, a land full of milk and honey, as Yahuwah your El of your fathers promised you. So the promise, the covenant. So it shall be when you cross the Jordan, you shall set up on Mount Ebal. So that's where this blessing and cursing should really start. Remember, we talk about in Bible study that you shouldn't just follow the chapters, right? The chapters help for a point of reference, but just because a chapter says verse 1 doesn't mean that's where Yah actually had the context started. So really the context of the curses of Deuteronomy 28 actually starts in Deuteronomy 27, right? And it says, so, let me see. These stones, as I am commanding you today, and you should coat them with lime. Moreover, you should build there an altar. So we should need to be looking for an altar, right, in this area. And are we able to find an altar to Yahuwah your El, an altar of stones, which you shall not wield an iron tool on them. You shall build the altar of Yahuwah your El of uncut stones. Y'all knows what he's doing, right? And you shall offer on it burnt offerings to Yahuwah your El, and you shall sacrifice peace offerings and eat there and rejoice before Yahuwah your El. You should write on these stones all the words of this law very distinctly. Then Moses and the Levitical priests spoke to all Israel, saying, be silent and listen, O Israel. This day you have become a people for Yahuwah your El. You shall therefore obey Yahuwah your El and do his commandments and statutes which I command you this day. So now this is when they're entering into the land. And this is when he's saying, this day you have become a people for Yahuwah your El. After all that other stuff that has happened, now as they enter into the land, he's calling them a people for Yahuwah. All right, so next. So, now there's still an altar in that place. At least that's what they're saying. Standing as a witness to our people, even in modern days. There's right there in Shechem, as I was talking about, where, there's a mountain, 2 mountains that he said they walked through, and they say that that's the altar. And actually had some Hebrew inscriptions, or Hebrew talks about the scribe of Thutmose. No, that's not it. There's actually some kind of inscription there. I didn't put that in here. So it's very important to understand archaeology too, because it's just not us, just like I said, it's just not us just saying stuff. There's actually something that actually backs it up. And some of the things that we're trying to tell people about the blessings and curses and how they are so significant even unto the day. All right, so next. So that's when he start in Deuteronomy 27. That's when these curses start, right? So it says in verse 11, Moses also charged the people on that day, saying, when you cross the Jordan, these shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. And he names those tribes. And for the curses shall stand on Mount Ebal, he named those tribes. So it's important to understand why these tribes. I don't know. I don't have any references. So if you know anything about why these tribes were selected to be on certain places, let me know as well. All right? Because we know it's not in order. Reuben is the oldest, right? And then Benjamin is the youngest on the left. So it's interesting. Why did he pick the tribes in this order? But anyway, it says the Levite shall then answer and say to all the men of Israel with a loud voice. And he said, cursed is the man who makes an idol or a molten image, abomination to Yahuwah, the work of the hands of the craftsmen, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall say amen. So he goes through all this stuff. Honor your father and mother. We heard that before, right? Moves his neighbor's boundaries, right? So everybody's agreeing that, hey, these people are going to be cursed if you do these things, right? Distort the justice due an alien, orphan, or a widow, right? He tells us to take care of the widow. I got one messed up there in verse 21, but who lies with his father's wife, like Reuben did, right? Cursed is he who lies with animal, bestiality. Hear people talking about that now, which is just nastiness. But who lies with his sister, the daughter of his father or of his mother. So now some of the things that was basically told that Abraham did with Sarah, right? Now you can't do that. So you can see how he was basically slowly preparing the people for the things that he wanted, right? He had to get them out of that sinful state to get them to where he wanted. us to be as well, right? Like Adam and Eve, right? We know that all his sons and daughters had to be sleeping with each other, right? But now he's like, wait a minute, there's enough people on earth, you don't have to keep doing that. So little by little, he's getting us to where he wants us to be. And it says, strikes his neighbor in secret. All the people say, amen, who accepts a bribe and strike down an innocent person. We know that happens now. Who does not confirm the words of this law by doing them. How about that one? Who does not confirm the words of this law by doing them. And they agreed. Our ancestors agreed. So if we're not doing the words, once again, there's this curse, right? Being out here now, people talking about, oh yeah, we're done. The curse, once you give your life to Yahusha, the curse just goes away. But is that all true too? I know that he even raised up and blessed our people, even in the midst of their tragedy of the rest of the nation. But yet Daniel was living during a time when the people were cursed in Babylon and in Persia, right? But yet he was being lifted up, but yet he was still living among, it ain't like he said, okay, you go back to the promised land, everybody else stays where they are. No, right? So even though Yah blesses us where he is, and even in Adam and Eve, right, the curse was that we would die, right? And we know that in the, 1 Corinthians 15, that Yahusha, once he put all those things on his footstool, death and the grave, right? Like, that's the final enemy is death and the grave. So we're still being cursed with death even today because of what Adam did to us. Just like as the children of Israel, even though we're scattered, we can be individually blessed, but as a nation of people, for us to go back, that, that will end the curse is when he breaks us back to the promised land. All right, so next. All right, so same thing, Mount Ebal, you can see some of the bigger map there. You can see where, where they're basically saying that some of these places could actually have been based upon the map. You see Mount Gerizim was a blessing and Mount Ebal was a curse. So, you can go into these places. Oh, they're also saying that there's a misidentified one. So there's one altar there that at least this website is saying that it's not the right place. But you can see, right, that there's some archaeology where it has connections right to the Bible. And I'm like, I don't see how people don't believe in the Bible, where it has so much archaeology and proof that it's like, I don't know. You got to say that these people were some kind of crazy cult that lasted for thousands of years to try to fool people for thousands and thousands of years. If you don't believe in the archaeology that's there. All right, so that next. So that's when Deuteronomy 28 starts, right? So that's why I say you can't just start with Deuteronomy 28 verse 1. You got to go back into Deuteronomy 27 to really understand what's going on here with the blessings and curses and the mountains. And then he says, now shall it be if you diligently obey Yahuwah. It goes back to obeying your El, being careful to do all his commandments, which I command you today, then Yahuwah, your El, will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And then you see the blessed, right? And it says, Yahuwah shall, Yahuwah will, right? You'll be the head, not the tail, above, not beneath. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. All these blessings, right? Just like he said before, all these curses. So you can see the connection to Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, right? He's basically talking about that. And then in verse 9, it says, then Yahuwah will establish as a holy people to himself as he swore to you, if you keep the commandments of Yahuwah your El and walk in his ways. So all the people of the earth will see that you are called by the name of Yahuwah, and they will be afraid of you. Nobody's scared of us now because we ain't doing what y'all called us to do. So now we always feeling like we're running for our lives and threatening and feel like we're never getting things right. But Yah has a plan when we obey him. And I know there's going to be still some hard-headed people out there that ain't doing it. But eventually I feel like he's going to allow persecution to happen to us. That's why I said read Deuteronomy 32, the Song of Moses, because you can have all kind of politicians that don't care about us, even our own people coming against us in some of those areas, right? Laws are getting passed against us. And what's going to lead us until we cry out to Yah, right? So that's what he's trying to establish way back then, that he is a memory of who we are. He put rocks and stuff all in places and did all this stuff for us to know who we are to this day so we can return to him also. So in 13 says, Yahuwah make you the head, not the tail, and you will be you only will be above, and you will not be underneath. if you listen to the commandments of Yahuwah your El, which I charge you today to observe them carefully, and do not turn aside from any of the words which I command you today to the right or left, to go after other gods, other Elohim, to serve them, like, pagan worship, right? No matter what you put Bible, sprinkle the Bible on top, it's still pagan worship when you do those things. All right, so next. So these are all the different curses. I'm not going to go through all of them because, people know mostly about the Deuteronomy 28, about, some of the things sent as slave across the world. That's important. That's our people, right? Have anxiety for their lives and depression not succeeding. Why they, working mental health, and they would, people talk about how they actually had targeted black people. They even say the African Americans need to be targeted because we don't take our medicines and stuff. You hear that in the communities of people where they're coming up with policies around that. Why are they, pinpointing us? Another man will sleep with their wives. That's why I'm talking about the mixed people. Mulattoes, they talked about that, right? Build buildings but cannot live in it. People talk about the White House. We built the White House and didn't live in it, right? Well, I guess Michelle Obama did, right? At least from an African-American, Obama from an African perspective. But I know, there's some history with Obama. But it says, we'll farm but cannot partake of the harvest. So children will be sold as captives. Resources of land will be used for another nation. So all this stuff, we call it a byword. We know all this stuff connects to our people. Even white people now, European Americans, they are actually waking up to who we are based upon Deuteronomy 28. But then it comes that time, they said, oh, this happened in the past. That's already, people try to say it's done away with. So next slide. So this is important one. Verse 45, in Deuteronomy 28:45. So all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed. Are we destroyed as a people? So what stopped that from happening? So either it's true or it's not true. Because you will not obey Yahuwah your El by keeping his commandments and statutes which he commanded you. They shall become a sign and a wonder on you and your descendants forever. Forever. Right? So it doesn't just stop. It happens. That's why we still went from Portugal, went to Africa, went everywhere else. West Africa, I should say, because Israel is in Africa. But running all these different places, and we still look at who our people are. I think Truth Unedited did a great thing about how, a lot of our people are spread throughout all the world and how we still all marginalized no matter where we are. We're still at the bottom, right? Like, that's the curse. It says, therefore, you shall serve your enemies whom Yahuwah will send against you in hunger and thirst and nakedness and the lack of all things, and he will put an iron yoke on your neck. Who else that had that iron yoke, like that they put in all the pictures at least? Might happen in some Slavs open in Europe or something might have happened to, but we know whenever they show that picture with an iron yoke on their neck, it's during the slave trade, right? Until he has destroyed you. And Yahuwah will bring a nation against you from afar. So number one, the nation got to be from afar. And from the end of the earth, as the eagle swoops down on a nation whose language you shall not understand. We didn't understand English and Spanish and Portuguese, right? When we were being taken as slaves even from Africa. A nation of fierce countenance who have no respect for the old, nor show favor to the young. You can see that even happening now, even in America, or in other places where, they just don't matter. You'd be seeing grandma on the ground getting beat down by a policeman, right? Like, what's going on, right? And it doesn't matter how young. They would try to arrest a little, 10-year-old on a bicycle or something one time. Like, what? What's happening, right? We can see how, but, I'm not against cops because we need cops. People talking about defunding the police. I'm like, are you crazy? Go back to my old neighborhoods and my old cities I'm from. You be happy for the police to come sometimes when you need them. You don't, you kind of worry of them, but at the same time, you better have somebody there to stop some of the stuff that's going on around you. So next. All right, so this is where, it actually occurred. So, all the things I talked about before was with Moses. So we know that Moses just told them what to do when they got to the land. So it wasn't until Joshua actually got to the place, as we see in Joshua 8:33, and it says all Israel with the elders and officials. So elders and officers, and their judges. So that's what the people that was actually leading Israel, right? And we're standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carry the ark of the covenant of Yahuwah, and the stranger as well as the native, showing the strangers and natives. So we'll talk about that next week, y'all willing. Half of them stood in front of the Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of Yahuwah, had commanded them at first. to bless the people of Yah. Then afterwards he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of Moses. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded which Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women and the little ones and the strangers who are living among them. Why is that so important? The women, the little ones, the strangers, right? So, like I talked about it many times. So read Deuteronomy 29, and that's what we're going to talk about, the second covenant. So next slide. And we won't talk a little bit about this, but we can see that Joshua, he says, after they broke the covenant and messed up, he had to create a second agreement with the children of Israel. So like I said, we keep on breaking the covenant. That doesn't mean Yah's going to break his side of the covenant. So for those talking about Israel's been replaced, Yah continues to bring his people back. And I think this is in the lesson from yesterday, so I won't read all the way through it. But it says, Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem. So that same place where the blessings and curses were. So that's why it's important for y'all researchers to go out there and find more information about that, right? And then he told them to, 14, now therefore fear Yahuwah and serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your forefathers served beyond the river in Egypt and serve Yahuwah. So all this Egyptology, all this stuff, y'all's like, okay, you got to get rid of that stuff, right? If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve Yahuwah, choose for yourself the day whom you will serve, rather the gods or Elohims which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in which land you are living. But as for me and my house, right? For me and my house, I know what I'm going to do. We will serve Yahuwah. So I won't keep on going through a lot of this because, like I said, since it's not the first time that we read this, but then it gets down to verse 19. He says he is a jealous Elohim, right? He's a jealous El, right? He will not forgive your transgressions of your sins. Talking about iniquity. What is a sin? If you forsake Yahuwah and serve foreign gods. So we got to get away from these foreign gods. Then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. Right? But what did they say? The people said to Joshua, no, but we will serve Yahuwah. And they lied and, messed up all over again. Right? So then in verse 25, so Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and they broke it again. Right? So we broke it so many times and he still is so faithful to us. So the new covenant is the same thing. He said with your fathers, right? With your ancestors that he's making this, not like the covenant he made with our ancestors, showing you that the people that he's making the new covenant with in Jeremiah 31 is for those who already had the old covenant. And Gentiles didn't have the old covenant, except those who were strangers and stuff that was among them, right? So it's very important to understand that too, so you know what the future beholds, because that Jeremiah 31:30, when it talks about Jacob's trouble and all that stuff, all that's what we live in until we return, based on these blessings and curses. All right, so next. All right, and this is where I think I'm going to end. So make sure. Yeah, that is where I'm in. All right, so this is important because a lot of people talk about Deuteronomy 28 is already done away with, right? And you can see that this is historian David Ramsey. It says that he was an American physician, public official, and historian from Charleston, that same area, Georgetown and all that, Charleston, South Carolina, right there in that what we were talking about earlier. He was one of the first major historians of the American Revolutionary War. During the Revolution, he served in South Carolina legislature until he was captured by the British. So he was a very important man, right, living in that area. And he says there are, there are also Jews here from the remote parts of Asia, so that this is the fountain of intelligence concerning that the people in the East, the resident Jews, are divided into two classes called the Jerusalem Jew or white Jews and the ancient or black Jew. He separated them. Who's the ancient Jew? The black one, just like Gates of Huldah was talking. The white Jews reside at this place. The black Jews have also a synagogue here. But the great body of that tribe inhabited towns in the interior of that province. So he's talking about in India, Koshin Jews, the black Koshin Jews in India, right? Look them up. But the reason why I bring him up is because on the right, he talks about, I believe it was him, Matthias Christian Springer is the other guy. And he is a German, I take my glasses off of this one, geographer and historian. He was notably the author of works on the North American history, the American Revolution, and I can't even see what that says. Marthana? I don't know what that says. Mahantha history. He studied history at University of Göttingen. I can't see that. As a pupil of August Ludwig von Skarger. I don't know who that is. But anyway, he's the one that basically talks about what happened in Spain and Portugal as well. And he talks about, a lot of people heard this one where he says, settled in the colonies of Congo, Angola, and other places which had been neglected. And Prince Henry's colonies were enlarged by his successors. King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas. That's what I was talking about in Africa. Or as I think Akuti, I think her name Patricia, was talking about, Emmanuel Bowen's map as well. And that's why I was talking about how the St. Thomas people went to that area, which had been discovered in 1471 and other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa, and from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews of Luango. So he basically connects, he says, who are despised even by the very Negroes are descendants, saying they all come from the same people, but there was a division between these Black Portuguese and the Negroes that was living in these areas, that they were fighting among each other, and they were despising one another, even though they descend from the same people. That's interesting, right? Even especially in today. But anyway, on the right side, it talks about how it says, the great lawgiver of the Hebrew nation has declared, thy sons and thy daughters shall be given unto another people. How exactly has this prophecy been fulfilled in several countries, especially in Spain and Portugal? In the former of these kingdoms, the Council of Toledo decreed that the children of the Jews should be taken from them and educated in the Christian faith. In the latter, when they were expelled, all under 14 years of age were forcibly detained to be baptized. In the frenzy and despair of the wretched parents at parting with their children, we contemplated that the accomplish of another prophetic denunciation, they shall be mad for the sight of their eyes, which they shall see. Verse 34, talking about Deuteronomy 28. So he's saying during that time, around 1492 and all that time, what was going on, that this was also a fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28. And these are, European people. So it's not just a Hebrew Israelite idea. That's what I'm trying to bring out. And it says, into what madness and fury and desperation have they not been excited, but the cruel exhortations and oppressions which they have undergone. After mentioning the oppressions and barbarous cruelty the Jews were compelled to endure, and the madness and consequent upon their extreme suffering, Moses further declares, talking about Moses, verse 37, thou shalt be an establishing proverb and a byword among all the nations where Yahuwah shall lead thee. How exactly has this prophecy been fulfilled upon this unhappy race, who have been a byword ever since their dispersion? He put an exclamation mark, dispersion, right? Like in various countries of the East, as well as in Europe, they have been subjected to disgraceful distinctions and condemned to wear outwardly the badges of their abject estate, and everywhere exposed to the insults of the vilest populace. They have been treated as of a different species, and in several parts of Europe, subjected to the same toll with those animals which they abhor. Christians, talking about pigs, Christians, Mohammedans, and pagans have agreed in abusing, vilifying, and persecuting them. And I didn't even read the whole book, right? So you go in and it even talks about more stuff. Actually, it was talking about the Jews of Spain and Portugal. So how were these people end up becoming the slave masters? Don't make sense. Don't make sense at all. All right, so next slide. So this is where we end. So this is what we're talking about next week, God willing, is going into the second covenant, unless I put a video about it, because like I said, I've already taught a lot of this, but I've noticed, as new people come and even people that's been around, they forget. But hopefully, that's why I said that these are the foundational stuff, because as you start getting to that, when we start talking about the other stuff, like we did with the gates of Huldah and all that other stuff, it's stuff that is not, it's not stuff that you can connect to, right? Especially you start doing your DNA. You start like I just did today with that whole thing with Peru and Portugal. I wonder why did my DNA shifted from one to the other. Makes sense now, right? There's a connection there. All right. Is that any questions there? All right. So let us pray. No, I didn't know if that was anybody that was new. Oh, Shabbat Shalom. I don't know who this is. Ladaris. I think that's what I'm saying your name right. Shabbat Shalom. I haven't read your comments, but Shabbat Shalom. All right. And Rit Wise. Shabbat Shalom. And that's it. That's all I see. I'll read your comments later as well. Sorry I wasn't able to get to them today. All right, dear y'all, we just thank you for all the things you've done for us, and we ask you to just continue to be with us as we pursue you, pursue righteousness, pursue your heart, not just head knowledge. Help us to be the people, not just talk about being the people. Help us to live the life that's pleasing before you. Give us guidance and direction. We know that you are moving us toward your plan, and help us to be a part of that plan in the end, where we enter into the promised land once again and to live there in safety without ridicule or fear of safety for our life, no longer be in fear of lacking, but that you will continue to be there, and as you promised our ancestors, to supply the things that we need forever and ever, and to dwell with us. To like we celebrate the Sukkot, we know that the time will come where there will be an ingathering, and that that you want to tabernacle there with your people. So help us to be willing and ready by our hearts, and trust in you and your plan, and do all that we can to wake up our people and also those who will receive you. We ask you not to help us to have any hate in our heart for the things that we have done. We should be hated by you, and the things as individuals that we have done, we should be hated by you as well. But yet you give us mercy. You allow your son to come and die for our sins, that we know that we need an atonement to be in right standing with you, for we know that we have so much sin in our life, that how can we stand before our holy, Kodesh, righteous Yah, in the state that we're in. But we thank you for giving us Yahusha, who died, who sits at your right hand, waiting to come back to redeem us as he prepares a place for us as your people. We thank you for calling us your priests, for us to be a kingdom of priests, and help us to live as those priests, always being serving you in the life that we live for others as well. We love you. We praise you. Ask you to help any sickness that's among us, heal us from our iniquities, for we know that we pulled away from that when we left your land, as we rejected your covenant. But help us, please have mercy, for we know that miracles and that your son also did, that you said that will happen even in our midst, that others people will see your presence within us because of your mercy, not because of what we deserve. We ask you to also help us with any financial problems that's happened among us. Help us to take the time to understand the value of prayer, to seek before you in your face, and not just read your word, but connect it through prayer and talking with you, where you can also talk back to us, to rise up those at this time that's needed, also in our life, to help us to do and accomplish the plan that you have for us as individuals. For we know that we're all members of that same body, and that we all need one another. So we ask you to bless us, to keep us, to help us as we move forward in this crazy and this dangerous world, to know that we have peace in you, that we have safety in you, and that your promises and your plan is greater than any other. So we trust in you, we love you, and we praise you. In Yahushua HaMashiach's name we do pray. Hallelujah. Amen. Hallelujah. Praise Yah.